Hello and welcome guys. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. This is Affinity: Chaos. Chapter 261. Gray watched on for a little longer before leaving the forge. Now, he wanted to check out the forgery classes. For someone who woke up every morning to train his physical body, before doing his normal elemental training, and then cultivating later in the day, he didn't see the process of forging to be strenuous. He actually looked at it as another way of practice. The man watched on as Gray left the forge, but didn't even say anything. Over the past 2 years, only 5 students had stayed in the forge for longer than a week. They all had the same excuses. How could top experts become blacksmiths? The building where the forgery classes take place was close to the actual forge. Gray walked in and was surprised by how few the people taking the class were. Doing a head count, there were only about 30 plus people, and most of them had uninterested looks. If they aren't interested, why did they bother to come? He couldn't help but ask himself. The instructor was a middle-aged man who had shoulder-length blonde hair. He stood at around 6'2", and had a burly build. He had a mustache which was the same color as his hair, and was dressed in brown loose clothes. "Come in, the class is just about to start," the man said when he saw Gray standing at the doorway. He thought the reason Gray didn't enter was that he felt the lessons had started, and barging in without invitation was rude. Gray was surprised since he originally didn't plan on coming in today. He only wanted to take a peek at the class, then go back home to contemplate. "Oh well, it's not like I have anything to do anyway." With a shrug, he calmly walked into the class while being watched by the over 30 people in the class. He wasn't really bothered by the looks they were giving him. Finding an empty seat at the front, he took it without much deliberation. Since he came here to learn, then of course he would be at the forefront, so he could hear every single thing the instructor says. "Hello students, my name is Instructor Scott Dunstan, and I will be the one who will teach you all you need to know about forgery before you go for the practicals." Usually, forgery classes are mostly practicals, but there are some things you should be aware of before going. Firstly, there are 2 branches of forgery, which are forgery and forge mastering. The difference between both is simple: arrays. A forger can forge weapons which are used by those in the collection and fusion planes. They also forge tools used for daily activities. Forge masters, on the other hand, create elemental weapons. Unlike normal forging, a forge master will have to inscribe arrays in the object while forging it. I presume most of you should know about this. Also, this class only accepts 2 kinds of elementalists: earth and fire elementalists. Since some of you are still in the fusion plane, the class will be divided as those in the arcane plane and above will need actual practicals. But for now, I'll distribute these books to you all. You have 30 minutes to go through the first 3 chapters. The book was surprisingly smaller than what Gray expected. Being someone who enjoys learning new things, he quickly dug into the new world of forging that he had discovered. Luckily, he left Void with Alice, or else he wouldn't have been able to focus with him around. Hearing about forge mastering excited some of the students. Every single one of them here is either an earth elementalist or a fire elementalist. A few of them is actually both. They all enthusiastically took the books to study their content. The first 3 chapters only contained the basics of forging, as well as the types of forging. It glossed a little at forge mastering and some of the mistakes to avoid. Arrays can only be inscribed in the weapon just before the start of the tempering phase. It is a very fast process that only those that are proficient in arrays can do due to the small timeline given. 30 minutes later, Instructor Dunstan stood up. Students above the fusion plane should step forward. Gray and about 20 more youths stood up. Of the other 20, 8 of them were ladies. Come with me. As for the rest of you, continue studying the book. I'll send someone over." Instructor Dunstan led Gray and the 20 other youths to another room that was on the upper left side of the class. The room was bigger than the previous one, and as soon as Gray stepped in, he recalled the forge he saw earlier, only this one only had furnaces. There were at least 50 furnaces in the room. Forgery is all about practicals. Without sufficient practicals, you can't actually do anything, Instructor Dunstan said as the group entered the forge. "Here, you all will be tasked with different practicals, of course. The materials you will be using are only cheap metals, which the Academy has in tons. There are different steps in forging, but for now, we'll focus on the heating step. Here, you will all be tasked to regulate the temperature of the furnace to the required intensity to be able to melt the items inside the furnace. Because of the properties of each material, they all require different temperatures. Since you're all students, we can't use actual high-end materials for now, Instructor Dunstan said with a smile. Gray listened intently as Instructor Dunstan continued speaking on the temperature needed for melting. Instructor Dunstan further went on to give them an example. He was surprisingly a dual elementalist, being a fire and an earth elementalist. After he was done with his example, this process is better for fire elementalists, since it's easier for them to regulate the flames. Of course, the others are allowed to give it a try. Chapter 262. Now, each of you, pick a furnace, Instructor Dunstan ordered. Gray and the other students went on to stand in front of different furnaces. The one Gray picked was on the right side of the room. There were damaged ingots of low quality close to the furnace, as well as coal. Instructor Dunstan's example wasn't long, only about 5 minutes or so. He explained the process of regulating the temperature, and when and how to know when to increase and decrease the fire. Gray placed the ingots in the furnace, before placing them in coal. Too much? Instructor Dunstan's voice sounded beside his ear. If the amount of coal placed in is too much, it would increase the difficulty of the heating process. Of course, given your plane, you shouldn't have any problems with controlling the intensity of your flame, he added. Just like Gray, Instructor Dunstan was still in the origin plane. Although he was in the 9th stage, he couldn't compare himself with Gray. From Gray's appearance, he guessed he wasn't over 20. He had never seen anyone Gray's age that was already in the origin plane, much less in the 5th stage. He must have been one of those who went for the special training. He thought to himself, I'm not really proficient in regulating the intensity of my flame. I'll still need your guidance, Instructor. Gray said with a light bow. Instructor Dunstan nodded slightly before heading over to assist the other students. Of the 20 others, 3 were earth elementalists, so they had to use the more traditional way in the heating process. Gray took out some coal before lighting up the furnace. His rare blue flames once again caught the attention of everyone in the room. Instructor Dunstan was dumbstruck when he saw Gray's flame. This was the first time he was seeing a special flame, and he felt overwhelmed by the difference between it and normal flames. He was further left speechless when he recalled how effective special flames were in forging. There are 3 grades of special flames, and Gray's blue flame was surprisingly in the mid-grades. Seeing something like this to a blacksmith like Instructor Dunstan was a dream come true. He didn't go over to Gray though, rather, he urged the other to continue what they were doing. Giving Gray a special treatment because of his flame was not something someone of his character would do. It was not something that was allowed in the Lunar Academy. In the Academy, all students must be treated equally by the instructors. Oliver places this law in the Academy to improve the courage of some of the students. There are some people that naturally have low self-esteem. Seeing others getting special treatments would further decrease the already low self-esteem. This will in turn affect their cultivation life. Gray and the others stayed in the room, practicing their flame control, as well as the intensity of their flames. After staying in the room for almost 3 hours, only one student made substantial improvements, and it was unsurprisingly not Gray. In the aspect of learning, Gray couldn't be said to be the brightest. This was proven with his time learning a race. His advantage was his dedication and inhumane hard work. The student was a young lady called Ella. Gray didn't know her full name, just the name she was called by her friends. This motivated Gray to trying harder so he could make some improvements. But even after staying 2 more hours, his control only increased by a little. This is good, at least there are some improvements, he thought to himself. Luckily, Void wasn't here, or else he would have laughed him to no end. Of the 21 students, Gray could be said to be average in terms of improvements. This was with the fact that he had a higher plane and a better fire. Instructor Dunstan was flabbergasted by how small Gray's improvement was. He didn't expect that he would make such small improvements, but seeing the look of determination on Gray's face, he could only encourage him to try harder. It wasn't like they wouldn't come again, so no need to pressure them. When the students were walking out of the room, Gray called out to him, "You want to stay a little longer?" Instructor Dunstan was stumped by Gray's request. Most students want to leave this place as soon as possible. Yet, Gray wanted to stay longer. Yes, you see, I feel I could improve a little further today, so I plan to stay longer. Gray nodded with a determined look. He wasn't only learning to forge, but also training himself. If he went home now, he would only continue his training. So why not stay here a little longer? Instructor Dunstan looked around, still not sure of what to say. The materials in the room that were prepared for their training were already finished. He could only get a new batch the next day. Getting more today would be difficult. I can cover for the cost of the materials, Gray suggested when he saw Instructor Dunstan's look. It's okay, no need to. Stay here, I'll go get more materials. But there's a limit to how much I can bring, Instructor Dunstan said. To him, doing this was already giving Gray special treatments. But since this was Gray's request, he couldn't deny it. He left Gray and headed to the forge. He came back with some materials, but not really enough to last Gray for long. This is all I can get my hands on. From tomorrow, you can prepare your materials, Instructor Dunstan said. Since Gray could get the materials, there was no need in taking the risk of getting them for him. Chapter 263. Thank you, sir. Gray thanked him sincerely. Just as Instructor Dunstan was about to leave, Gray called out to him again. The reason Gray called him this time was to know if he could get books on forging from the library. Gray was elated after knowing there were books about forging and even forge mastering in the library. Well, he expected the academy to have some in the first place. Won't you be going to the arrays lessons? If you want to be a good forge master, you must be proficient in arrays, Instructor Dunstan asked when he was about to leave. It was already midday, and array lessons were just about to start. He felt it would be beneficial for Gray if he went to the array lessons. Not today, instructor, I'll focus on this for now, Gray said. He was already good in arrays, and his time in the trial land, having to break those complex arrays, increased his proficiency. He wasn't even sure his teacher knew arrays that were as complex as those ones, else he would have taught him, or at the very least told him about it. Instructor Dunstan left Gray alone after his refusal to go to the array lessons. He didn't think his decision not to go was wrong, though, after all, some people only started learning arrays after they were good in forging, and vice versa. Being left alone, Gray quickly got to work with the items. Some of the materials brought in were different from the last ones they used. In this small batch, there were 3 pieces of a bronze plate and a small piece of a silver horseshoe. The different items needed different temperatures to melt them. This helped Gray within the time he was there, and he almost had the thought of trying out one of the weapons he had with him. He took so many weapons from Eaton's cave that he still didn't know what to do with them. He hadn't even studied them properly. After much consideration, he decided to check them out when he got home today. That way, he'll know what to keep and what to discard. After staying for almost 2 hours, he ran out of materials. With no other choice, he left the room. There's still some time before it gets dark. I'll go to the library to take some books home. I need to check up on Clouse. It's weird he didn't come to find me after leaving his father's office yesterday, Gray thought as he headed to the library. He initially wanted to read in the library, but thinking about how much time he had spent on learning forging, he felt it wasn't a good idea. 20 minutes later, he was in front of Clouse's house, and Clouse wasn't around. Not expecting this, he decided to see if he was in Reynolds's house. Hey Ray, have you seen Clouse today? Gray saw Reynolds sitting in a very relaxed manner outside his house, so he asked while walking into the compound. No, I was planning to go see him. Reynolds shook his head before sitting straight. There's no one in his house. That's why I came over, Gray explained. Strange. Reynolds stood up, finding the fact that Clouse wasn't in the academy strange. We shouldn't bother about it. He's probably spending time with his dad. Gray waved it off. If not for the fact that he still couldn't find his mother, then he would have already gone there to spend some time with her. Okay, I'll be going home in a week time or so, said Reynolds. It had been almost a year he saw his little brother. After having a close call with death in the trial land, he wanted to see him again, his parents as well. That's good to hear, Gray said with a smile. He felt sad inside, since he couldn't see his mother or father. It has been so long. Yet no words from his mother. The thought that something bad might have happened to her scared him. He stayed with Reynolds a little longer before going over to Alice's, so he could get Void. The little guy was having a great time at Alice's and almost refused to leave. When Gray got home, He went to his backyard and slowly started taking out the items he got from Eaton's cave one by one to inspect them. Behind his house, other than the school fence that separated it from the forest, there was nothing else. He created high walls on each side to block anyone from seeing his backyard from the other two houses. Taking a look at some of them, he was stunned when he realized they were just shiny, nothing else. But there were at least 20 which were good. The only elemental weapon that caught his eye was a bow. It was a wind elemental weapon that increased the speed of the arrow to a terrifying level. However, other than the dual blades he previously used, he had never trained with any other weapon. I'll keep it. He took out the blue vest he got from Eaton's cave. It was the only defensive elemental weapon he found, but he didn't know how it worked. He used the earth element to create a man-like statue before putting the vest on it. Taking a few steps back, he sent a wind blade towards it. Bang! Well, that's hopeless. I thought it would at least reduce the impact of the attack. Gray shook his head as he walked towards it. Void watched Gray as he walked closer to where the statue was shattered. He took a peek at the shiny things that Gray stacked on the side. After finding out that some of them were useless, he kept them aside, hoping to use them in his forging lesson the next day. They were good materials after all, and most of them were even silver. Seeing that Gray was distracted by the vest, Void vanished from his position. By the time he reappeared a few seconds later, 2 items from the weapons stacked had gone missing. They were shiny, although not as shiny as some of the things he stole. They weren't that bad. Chapter 264. After studying the vest a little longer, Gray tried infusing elemental essence in it. Seeing that it was blue, he infused water elemental essence into it. As soon as the water elemental essence entered the vest, it lit up with a light blue color. Oh, guess it was only out of energy. Gray mumbled with a soft exclamation before continuing to feed the blue vest with elemental essence. While he was focused on the vest, the shiny weapons he kept on the side were slowly starting to get smaller in numbers. Void would occasionally disappear, then appear. His little face had a wide smile plastered on it. After 5 minutes, more than half of the items were gone without a trace. Gray decided it was time to test out the vest again. After he infused it with water elemental essence, creating another statue, he wore the vest on it. Taking a few steps back, he attacked it with a wind blade. Bam! When the wind blade got within 3 meters of the statue, a blue light shot out of the vest, covering the statue and everything within a 1.5 meters radius of it. It was almost like an ice sphere, only it wasn't as solid as ice. The wind blade came in contact with the blue light, but other than making a small sound, it didn't go further before disappearing. This should be the attack power of a peak arcane plane elementalist. Gray thought to himself. When attacking, he reduced the strength of the attack greatly to gauge the defensive power of the blue light. Isn't it a little too dangerous, doing this experiment here and all? Void couldn't help but ask when he saw how freely Gray was showing his assets. He might not have been in this world for long now, but he knew all too well about greed. He was a greedy cat after all. Aren't these enough to keep the prying eyes of people out? And besides, you're also here. I don't think there's anyone here who can escape your senses. Gray said, a little too confident in Void's sensory ability. Other than Overlord Plane elementalists, there was no way any other person could spy on him, and since Void could easily sense the stages of those 2 Overlord Plane experts back at Zivia City, Gray felt he shouldn't have a problem with sensing any other person in the academy. You're right about that. But the sooner you get done with this the better, Void advised. I'll be done soon. Gray nodded. He took a glance at Void before turning around. Just as he turned around, he looked back again, this time at the items he wanted to use as materials. Although he didn't know how many they were, he knew they weren't that small. There should be at least 50 there. How come it isn't up to 20 now? He asked himself, unless his eyes darted straight at Void, who acted like he wasn't seeing him. Void, keep them back. I need them for forging, Gray said. If he didn't have any uses for them, then he didn't mind giving them to Void. But now, he needed materials, and Void was stealing the few he had managed to acquire. How can you destroy shiny things because you want to learn how to forge shiny things? Void asked disapprovingly. It just didn't make sense. Gray wanted to learn how to make shiny things. So why did he want to destroy the ones he already has? Because you have to destroy to rebuild, Gray said. Well, that's just dumb, Void said, not wanting to give the items back to Gray. Void, they're mine. You saw them, but your greed made you steal the crystal instead of them. Gray sneered before walking closer to Void. Fine, I'll give them back to you. It's not like they're great anyway. Void snorted and waved his paws. 10 weapons appeared on the ground. Seeing them made Gray smile while still looking at Void. He could see the pain in Void's eyes as he returned them, but it was not his concern. That's all I took, he said angrily. Heh, only a fool would believe you. Gray smirked. For Void to release 20 meant he still had at least 40 with him. There was no way he would believe this was all he took. I'm telling you, this was all I took, Void tried to persuade. Gray didn't buy it and continued staring at him. Seeing that he still didn't want to return it, he threatened, looks like you wouldn't be eating for the next 5 days. You're such a heartless person, Void said before making another 10 more appear. 3 days then. Gray showed Void 3 fingers, making him anxious. Fine, take it. This is all I took, Void said before another 23 weapons appeared on the ground. Gray had a smile on his face before dropping a single finger. Now, he had 2 fingers up, which meant Void wouldn't eat for 2 days. I swear, that's all. Void almost wanted to cry. He was telling the truth. That was all the items he took. Unfortunately, Gray didn't believe. You're such a despicable person, Void said before taking out 10 more from his storage to hand over to Gray. They were the worst of the worsts in his spatial storage, but he still almost couldn't bear with parting away with them. Gray smiled before turning his attention back to the vest. He had managed to see what Void liked, although he didn't like it more than the real shiny things. He still liked it, and it was food. Void's appeal for food was almost on the level of shiny things. Gray knew he was only able to take these items because they weren't a treasure, and weren't that shiny. Had they been on the level of the crystal Void took from Etenth, then he would never return it, even if it meant starving for 2 weeks. Chapter 265. Gray finished with his experiment on the blue vest, and noticed its defensive prowess was amazing, although he couldn't use his full strength, since he didn't supply the vest with enough energy. But it didn't have any problems with defending an all-out attack from a 4th stage Origin Plane Elementalist for a short time. When he was done examining the blue vest, he started studying the books he got from the library, completely neglecting Void. The day ended without much happening. On the morning of the next day, he went for his usual training, came back, and prepared to go for forging classes. The books he read increased his knowledge of forging overall, and he would like to implement some things when practicing. Gray was currently stuck in a dilemma. Given Void's love for shiny things, he was scared to take him into the academy, but he couldn't always leave him with Alice, and he refused to stay at home alone. Left with no other choice, he had to repeatedly warn Void not to take anything. Void nodded grumpily, asking him if he looked like someone who would steal other people's things. Gray didn't reply, but he knew the answer in his heart. As long as it's shiny, Void would most likely forget it belongs to someone else. He dared to steal a treasure from a horde of lightning apes and an ice dragon. There was nothing Gray didn't think he wouldn't dare to do for shiny treasures. Taking Void with him, Gray headed for forging classes. This time, there were only 3 students in the class when he stepped in. The young lady from the previous day was amongst them, Ella. She was a fire elementalist who was in the 3rd stage of the arcane plane. With a heart-shaped face and waist-length black hair, she was the dreams of some of the boys here. When she saw Gray step in with a strange, cute black cat, she was stunned, not expecting Gray would have such a pet. During the entire lesson the previous day, Gray was the one who spoke the least. He was always focused on what the instructor was saying. Being annoyed by the 2 boys who were bugging her, she decided to switch seats, taking the seat close to Gray. She turned to him after sitting. Hello, I'm Connor Ella. Gray raised his head to look at the hand stretched towards him from the next seat. Gray, he said before shaking her hand. Ella looked at him a little oddly, not expecting he would be this bland. Due to her looks, she always tends to attract attention from every single boy around her. There were even some who only came to forgery classes just because they wanted a chance to get close to her, like the duo who were bugging her a moment ago. That's a strange cat. I haven't seen anything like it before, can I touch it? She asked, still smiling. She felt more free speaking with Gray when she noticed he didn't really care about her looks. But thinking about it, she didn't find it strange given Gray's facial appearance and calm demeanor. He must have gotten countless girls more beautiful than she was. And besides, she didn't have any plans with being with him, she already had a partner. Sure, he's a little grumpy at times, but it should be fine, Gray replied with a small smile. He would do almost anything to get Void off his hands right now, since an opportunity had presented itself. Then he didn't mind the young lady looking after Void for him. He wanted to place his entire focus on the lesson, and with Void, he couldn't. He passed Void over to Ella, and he noticed Void gave him a knowing look. Sorry, bud, you'll enjoy her company more. I really need to focus on this lesson. Gray apologized to Void. HMPH, you'll have to cook something. Oh yes, that's the spot. Void, who was speaking to Gray, stopped midway when his stomach was being scratched by Ella. His name's Void. Gray told Ella a little about Void before opening the book he brought with him to the class. A few boys who recently entered the class were speechless when they saw Gray actually focused on reading a book, when a nice-looking young lady was sitting close to him. Even Void didn't think Gray was this addicted to learning, but when he thought about how he always looked serious whenever he was telling him about new things, he just shrugged it off and continued enjoying his time with Ella. She was a good belly scratcher, almost at Alice's level. After a few minutes, Gray closed the book and started speaking to Ella, who placed her focus on the black cat on her lap. There wasn't really anything to talk to Gray about in the first place, and the only reason she approached him was to ward off the boys disturbing her. Her friends hadn't arrived yet, and they most likely won't, since they didn't like the lessons the previous day. Oh, that you see, I come from a family of forge masters, so I already have some experience, she said. It doesn't change the fact that you made such a huge improvement. If you were already good with it, you would have skipped that part, unless you just want the attention, which I think you don't. Gray looked behind her while speaking of the part, only to see almost half of the boys staring at him evilly. Sorry, but compared to them, I'd rather talk to you. Although, I don't think you have any interest in speaking to me. Ella apologized. The truth is, I don't like being disturbed when I'm learning, but these guys wouldn't really be able to do anything to me. Gray shrugged. He wasn't lying. Being disturbed when training or learning was something he hated. Being a slow learner, every single second was precious to him. The reason he entertained Ella was because he wanted to learn some things from her. Since she made good improvements the previous day, she must know some things about forging. Gray spoke with Ella for about 10 minutes, and just when he was about to complain of being too early, Instructor Dunstan finally arrived. When he saw how the number of students had decreased, he smiled softly but didn't bother about it. Most of the fusion plane students didn't attend the class. It looked like they were waiting till they broke through to the arcane plane before continuing. He expected to see Gray, given how enthusiastic he was the previous day. The only thing he didn't expect to see was Ella sitting close to him, but it was none of his concern. Without further ado, he started the lesson for the day, speaking on the different materials as well as the temperatures needed to be maintained. For the second day running, they would be focused on temperature once again. This time, he told them to keep the furnace within a particular range of temperature. They were going to use lead for the practicals today, and they needed to keep the temperature around 300 to 350 degrees Celsius. Gray immediately started the training. Due to the superiority of his flame, he had some problems with lowering it to such temperatures. But with the practice from yesterday, he managed to reduce it. Keeping the furnace in the temperature, though, was another story. He had to occasionally put coal in the furnace, while also occasionally sending flames inside. The practice ended 1 hour later, and just like the previous day, Ella was the one who had the best results of the students. Gray was below average in this practice because of the natural high temperature of his flame. Gray decided to check out the array class. He couldn't say he was already the best when it came to arrays, and learning more about it wasn't too bad. Unfortunately, other than things he already knew too well, they didn't speak about anything else in the array class. But getting to listen to the lesson gave him new conjectures about arrays, so he didn't take it as a waste of time. Void was with Ella all through the time they were in forging class to when they went for the array class. All in all, he had a pretty good day. since Void didn't get to disturb his learning. Thank you for your help today, Ella said before returning Void to him. You were more helpful. Gray smiled lightly while taking Void. Void jumped out of his hand, landing on his shoulder like he usually does. Turning around, Gray saw Clouse, with a smile plastered across his face. Knowing him, he knew he must be definitely thinking of something. Hey, bud, Clouse called out to Gray before Ella could leave. Chapter 266. Gray almost facepalmed when he saw Clouse coming over with a strange smile. From his encounter with Clouse, he knew he was definitely thinking of something bad. Hey, I've been waiting outside for almost an hour, Clouse said before lightly tapping Gray on his shoulder. Hey Void, how have you been? He asked while looking at Void. He only turned his attention elsewhere after Void nodded. Why didn't you just come in? Gray asked when he saw Clouse was done with his pleasantries with Void. Oh, I didn't want to disturb you. I know how much you love learning. It's quite a weird habit though, Clouse said thoughtfully. We'll talk when we get home, Gray said before turning to Ella. This is my friend, Clouse. Clouse, this is Ella. Ella looked at Clouse a little surprised that he was friends with Gray. When she first saw Clouse, his handsome face stunned her almost as much as Gray did. Had she not seen Gray, then Clouse would have been the most handsome guy she had ever seen. Other than his handsome face, she also felt a little sense of familiarity, like she had seen him somewhere before. It's nice meeting you. I've heard so much about you, Clouse said while shaking her hands, leaving her stunned and confused at the same time. Gray almost passed out, while Void was laughing inside. What the fuck is he doing? I'll kill him, Gray almost screamed out loud, but since he didn't want to look like a psychopath, he held himself back. You have? Ella asked with a confused expression. Yes, my friend speaks a lot about you, Clouse said after glancing at Gray. He does. Ella was lost for words. She only spoke with Gray today. So what did he know about her that he said to his friends? Of course, I have to always beg him to stop before he does. Clouse chuckled. Gray was literally on the brink of passing out. What the hell? I'm dead. He's taking revenge on me. Gray wanted to cry, but no tears came out. What did he do to be cursed with such a friend? Who did he offend? Clouse is probably going to kill him with a heart attack someday. Although he was a little panicky inside, he still put on a calm and collected expression. Other than his mouth, which twitched a few times when Clouse was speaking, he basically had the same expression as when Clouse first came. Oh, I didn't know. Ella glanced at Gray a little perplexed. She couldn't assimilate the Gray she spoke with in the class today to the one Clouse was speaking about. Her initial impression of Gray was that he was someone who didn't care about her beauty, but from what his friend is saying, it looked like he was actually into her. But why does he have such a nonchalant expression? She thought when she looked at his calm face. Seeing her glance towards her made Gray feel as if the ground should open up and swallow him. He couldn't stop Clouse from speaking, because if he did, it would look like what he was saying was true. But if he didn't, then Clouse would say more. Void was shaking from laughing too hard. He had truly missed Clouse. Haha, this guy is amazing. Things are always lively when he's around, he said while laughing. Well, he wouldn't be alive for long. I already have 10 different ways to kill him. FUCK. Since when I have spoken about this girl, I haven't even seen the idiot since leaving the principal's office. Gray said a little annoyed by Clouse's prank. Clouse glanced at Gray and smirked inside. He knew Gray wouldn't reveal his true expression, but he must be screaming inside. This will teach him not to mess with me, he thought before looking in Ella's direction. Ella was currently speechless. She originally thought she had made a new friend in the forging class. But if he liked her, then that would make their relationship awkward. She was thinking of ways to politely reject Gray when Clouse dropped another bombshell. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with you. TSK, you sure are lucky, Clouse said while shaking his head with a faint smile. Ella was left wide-eyed, and Gray, who had been keeping a cool expression, didn't know when his mouth opened wide. Void laughed so hard when he heard this that he nearly fell off Gray's shoulder. Shit. This has to stop. Gray couldn't allow Clouse to speak any further. Ella stared at Gray, who had a different expression for the first time, and it was almost like what Clouse said was correct, given his expression. Gray currently had the shocked expression of someone whose secrets had been made known to everyone. If only she knew Gray was currently planning ways to kill Clouse. He originally had 10 ways, but new ideas just keep popping into his head. Just as Clouse was about to continue speaking, "Enough, Clouse." Gray stopped him. "Enough of what? Does it look like I'm talking to you?" Clouse asked while glaring at Gray before returning his gaze to Ella. "By the way, how's Cleo?" "I haven't seen him since I returned," he asked when he noticed Ella was looking at him. "Cleo? Wait, you know him?" Ella asked with a dumbfounded expression. "Yes, of course, he's my friend." Clouse nodded before looking at Ella, and then Gray acting like he didn't know what he did. "Wait, you thought I was talking about him?" Clouse pointed at Gray, almost on the verge of bursting into laughter, and asked, "And you thought I was talking about you? Wasn't that the case?" Gray and Ella asked simultaneously. They couldn't be blamed for thinking this way. The way Clouse said everything sounded like he was talking about Gray. PFFT. Of course not. Clouse laughed out loud while holding his stomach. Chapter 267. Gray and Ella had awkward expressions while Clouse and Void were laughing their hearts out. Gray knew Clouse did this on purpose, but there was no way he could scold him in front of Ella. "Oh, it's you, the son of the mayor," Ella almost exclaimed. After Clouse revealed he knew Cleo, she knew the sense of familiarity she felt was true. So when she calmed down while Clouse and Void were laughing, she thought hard about where she saw him. Clouse's handsome face wasn't something one could see every day, and there was only one person she had seen that had left a deep impression on her with his facial appearance, other than Gray and Clouse, and it was the son of Luna City's mayor. Cleo, who Clouse was speaking about, was her boyfriend. Her family and his family had close ties, and they had been friends since they were young. About a year ago, Cleo took her to a gala held in Luna City. That was where she met the charming Clouse. Being the son of the mayor made Clouse a highly respected figure at the gala. She didn't expect her boyfriend would be friends with such an individual, and because of how free Clouse was, made her have a great impression of him. Only, it had been so long that she saw him, so she wasn't able to recognize him immediately. The fact that he was able to recognize her shocked her, to say the least. "Yeah, I knew you would recall me. I mean, who would forget seeing such a face?" Clouse said with a playful laugh. "If you're standing next to him, it's hard to remember you." Ella giggled while pointing at Gray. After knowing that Clouse knew her boyfriend, she was freer with him, especially after seeing his nature. There are only a few people in the world that would have a status like Clouse, yet still be so carefree. If not for the fact that she recognized him, she wouldn't have believed he was the son of the mayor of such a big city. On the way back to their living quarters, "I know you did that on purpose," Gray said while they were walking. "Did what?" Clouse pretended like he had no clue about what Gray was talking about. I really don't know what to do with you." Gray shook his head in defeat. Clouse was just a shameless individual, and there was no way he could get him to admit that he did it on purpose. "It's not my fault you misunderstood me," Clouse said with a grin. Gray wanted to argue, but thinking about it, was it truly Clouse's fault that he misunderstood him? The answer was no. "Where have you been for the past 2 days?" Gray changed the topic as they approached Reynolds's house. "Oh, just bonding with my dad. You know I'm all he has, so he wanted to know about everything in the trial land." Clouse scratched his head with a sad smile. They continued speaking as they got to Reynolds's house. They walked right in without knocking. Other than Alice, the others pretty much act this way in each other houses. "Hey Gray, I see you've finally been able to bring him back," Reynolds said while walking out from the kitchen. "Nope, he came back on his own," Gray said as he took a seat. Clouse looked at Reynolds and couldn't help but ask, "What were you doing in the kitchen?" "Well, you see I was trying to cook something," Reynolds revealed, which threw Clouse in a fit of laughter. "Let me tell you something, bud. There are things you can do, and there are things you can't. Cooking wasn't made for everyone, just let Gray do it," Clouse said seriously. Gray flicked his right hand, and wind blew in Clouse's face, messing up his hair. "But there's no harm in trying." Reynolds shrugged. I'll leave you to your demise then," Clouse sneered. He didn't know why Reynolds was even bothering. If it was something else, he would say there was a possibility he might be able to become an expert in it. But as for cooking, he should forget about it. Only monsters like Gray, who were blessed by the god of cookery, could attain something like that. And even if by some means Reynolds was able to learn how to cook, its taste would be either average or below average. So, what are your plans now? Clouse asked after Reynolds sat down. I'm thinking about joining the Empire's forces. Unlike you, I don't have a good family background, so this is the best option for me and my family. Although, I'm also thinking about becoming an instructor. This is why I want to go back home and discuss it with my parents, Reynolds said. At his current age and plane, he could take decisions for himself, but sometimes it's good to seek advice from those older than you. Once his parents tells him what they feel is the right choice for him to make, he would analyze it as well. Clouse nodded, expecting Reynolds to make such a decision. How about you? Clouse asked, looking at Gray. I've not really made a decision yet. Gray smiled lightly. I think it's best we talk about this with Alice as well. It would be bad if she's not included in this conversation. Yeah, I have an announcement to make. We should head over there now, Clouse said. His previous playful smile was gone. Gray's gaze turned intent before nodding, just as they got to the door to leave Reynolds' house. What's burning? Gray asked after sniffing the air. Nothing. Reynolds waved before trying to open the door. Clouse's previous serious expression was gone because he was currently laughing. I knew you didn't have any chances of becoming a great cook. He laughed out. Shit. My food, Reynolds exclaimed before dashing back into the kitchen. Chapter 268. The group went over to Alice's place with Clouse and Gray laughing at Reynolds for burning his food. Why are you two laughing? Alice asked after opening the door. From Reynolds's expression, she could tell the other two were laughing at his expense. Clouse went on to tell her how he forgot he was cooking. At least he's trying, unlike you. Alice comforted Reynolds, which lifted his mood only by a little though. Clouse suggested they headed over to the Silver Moon restaurant. The time he spent outside waiting for Gray, and Reynolds's attempt to prepare a meal, made him want to eat something. Reynolds quickly agreed to it. Gray had no problems with them going to the restaurant, and neither did Alice. They spoke about what they've been up to in the past 2 days, and other than Gray, the rest of them were actually resting, Alice included. Gray was the only one who immediately started learning something new. The group soon got to the city gate. Lunar City is always bustling with activity, from the multiple carriages entering the city to the people exiting it. There are times when people would actually need to slowly walk in like they were standing in a queue. But I think you need to take it slow with your training. I know you want to be strong and all, but you still need to look at other aspects in life, Clouse advised as they entered the city. Alice and Reynolds nodded simultaneously. Gray trained too much, and this had made him kind of antisocial. The only reason they were able to become friends with him was that they had befriended him just after he came to the academy. Even with that, they still don't get to see him often. Like what? Asked Gray. After the time he took the first test, his whole life had revolved around training. Other than learning about new things, he technically didn't have another hobby. Go out, make more friends, see things. You could even decide to travel around the Empire now given your plane, Clouse suggested. You guys are enough, Gray said. Yeah, but we won't always be with you. Let's face it, a time will come when we will have to take different paths. It's not like we wouldn't see each other again, but not as frequently as we do now, Clouse said as the group headed towards the Silver Moon restaurant. Yeah, you're right about that. I'll think of something else. But for now, I want to focus on becoming a forge master, Gray replied. Because of the experience he had after his first test, he made becoming stronger his goal. After training every single day for 3 years, he kind of got used to the feeling. For 3 years, his mother was the one he spoke with the most. Even at the time he came to the academy, he wasn't all that optimistic about making friends. Clouse was the first friend he made, and from all the people who were always with Alice and Reynolds, he became friends with only the duo. Of all his friends, Clouse was very persistent. He would always check up on him, almost every day when he just arrived at the academy. Alice and Reynolds were very helpful in the Lightning Hall, and whenever he had a problem with the element, he would usually search for either of the two to clarify some things to him. Other than Clouse, Alice, and Reynolds, the only other person he speaks with a lot in the academy compound was Instructor Blake. When the trio heard his reply, they shook their heads wryly. They could tell from his reaction, he wouldn't really change anytime soon. They soon got to the restaurant and were stopped because animals weren't allowed into the restaurant. But after Clouse declared his identity, they allowed them inside. They headed straight for the upper floor under the gaze of the crowd on the lower floor. As usual, compared to the lower floor, it was less crowded. Taking a table, the group sat down. While waiting for their food, they continued speaking about their plans. Just like Gray, Alice didn't really know what to do yet. Reynolds was the only one who was currently contemplating two choices. I recalled you said you wanted to make an announcement, Reynolds said right after the waiter brought their meals. Sigh, yes. The thing is, my dad has officially become the ex-mayor and principal of both Lunar City and Academy. Clouse sighed before saying, "What?" The trio exclaimed simultaneously, drawing the attention of the few people on the floor. "He resigned?" Alice asked. "Yes." Clouse nodded. "Wow, that's unexpected. Why? What happened?" Reynolds asked. "Well, I don't really know the details. He didn't tell me much." Clouse responded. He knew the reason though, but his father warned him not to tell anyone. Something's obviously up, Gray speculated. "Yeah, something probably big." Alice nodded, agreeing with Gray. "That's not all," Clouse said, drawing their attention back to him. "After successfully drawing their attention, we'll be leaving as well." "Oh," Gray exclaimed softly. The fact that Clouse's father was leaving with Clouse made him feel his speculation was accurate. Resigning was one thing, but leaving the city as well was another. There's also the possibility of Claw's father wanting to just spend some time with his son. "When are you leaving?" Alice asked. "I don't have any idea yet, but soon," replied Clouse. The table turned silent. Clouse didn't know what else to say, while the others were still trying to accept what was about to happen. "Guys, it's not like I'm dying," Clouse joked when he saw their reactions. "Yeah, we'll still see each other again." Reynolds forced out a laugh. "Come on, let's eat," Clouse said before digging right into his food. Reynolds and Alice also started eating. Gray didn't really feel hungry, so Void ate most of his meal. After leaving the Silver Moon restaurant, the group headed back to the academy, but not in the same lively fashion as they came. The news of Clouse leaving was sad, to say the least. They've always known they would separate soon, but they didn't expect it would be this early. Reynolds also said he would be going home to meet his parents. Alice decided to do the same as well. With the help of the trial land, their planes improved faster than they usually should have. This changed the time they needed in making life decisions. Most students their age are still in the arcane plane, so they are still focused on learning and improving their planes. But since they've skipped a few years, courtesy of the trial land, they had to make the decisions which they'd have made in like 3 to 7 years from now. Of course, they could still wait till then. After all, no one is forcing them to make any decisions now. "Oh Ray, there's something I want to tell you." Clouse walked up to Reynolds just as soon as they were about to enter the academy compound. "What's that?" Reynolds asked curiously. "Do not join the Empire's forces. Also, don't become an instructor yet. Wait for a few more years," Clouse advised. "Those are my only two choices," Reynolds said, a little confused. "Well, don't join any of them for now. You're still young. Why hurry?" Clouse asked with a shrug. "Fine, but I'm still going home though. I miss my family." Reynolds nodded reluctantly. He could tell something was going on, and it had to do with the Academy and the Empire. He felt the presumed upcoming war had something to do with it. Gray and the others all went back to their houses after their conversation. Of the group, Gray was a little sad since the others would be going back to their family, leaving him all alone. Had Chris been around, he wouldn't feel lonely. But now, he didn't know where Chris was. "Guess it'll just be me and you very soon, buddy," Gray said while caressing Void's fur. "Don't you know where your parents are? We could go there," Void asked. "Nope, no clue." Gray shook his head. "Why don't we go with Clouse?" Void suggested. I'll think about it," Gray said, looking at the sky. The bond he had with his friends was so high that he didn't actually want to see them separate. He was not the only one who felt this way. Clouse, Alice, and Reynolds all felt the same. Later in the evening, Gray started practicing with his wind, fire, and water elements. Training was the only thing he knew of that could take his mind off things, so he started training. Chapter 269. The next day, Gray woke up a little earlier than usual. and started his normal training routine. After going for his morning training, he went for forging lessons. This time, they were taught the tempering process. From there on, he went to the array class. Void was left with Alice all through the day, so when he was done with his lessons, he went over to get him. He didn't find Clouse nor Reynolds at home, so he guessed they might have gone out together. Sigh, more time to train for me, I guess, he thought before he started training once again. He couldn't use his wind and water element openly in the academy, since it might arouse suspicion if the few people who recognized him for having only 2 elements come to see him using it. Not seeing anyone he was acquainted with in the forging lessons made things easier for him. Well, he didn't really know all the people who knew him. He started his training with the fire and earth element, trying to see the limit of his earth's armor defense while attacking it with the fire element. Void watched Gray continue the same routine from the past day, and couldn't help but feel staying in the academy would probably be the most boring moment in his life. The thrill he got while they were in the trial land wasn't here, it was too safe here. Well, it technically is a learning facility, so it was supposed to be safe. But for a magical beast like him who loved fighting and adventure, it was not his cup of tea. Later that night, "Hey Gray, we need to leave this place," he said when he saw Gray coming out of the bathroom. "Yeah, I know, but not now. I need to at least get the basics of forge mastering first before leaving." Gray agreed with Void. The time he spent in the trial land had changed him. Their training was faster, he always had an opponent, and he was leaving freely. "I heard there's a place called the Magical Beast Forest. It sounds exciting. Why don't we go there?" Void suggested. "That was where we came from actually. The place where the array to the trial land is located," Gray explained while falling onto his bed, preparing to sleep. "Oh, we should have gone there then. Why bother to come to this boring place? Even if we don't want to go there, we should at least see the world," Void urged. He wanted to see the world in its entirety, not stay in a single boring place. Yeah, but first, I think I have an idea," Gray said, standing up from his bed. He was just struck with an amazing idea. Well, that's on the premise he could pull it off. "Oh, what's that?" Void asked. "Remember those wooden objects I got from that darkness elementalist?" Gray said while taking out one of the wooden objects from his storage ring. "Yeah, the one you used to locate where your friends were." Void nodded. "Well, I'm planning to improve it. If I can figure out how they made it, then there's a chance of improving it. I can even add another function to it," Gray explained excitedly. Since finding out that his friends were going, he had been a little down. And once he leaves the academy, he planned on searching for his parents. So he didn't know when he would be able to see his friends again, nor where to start searching for them. But if he's successful with his current idea, then locating them wouldn't be a problem. He sent his spiritual sense into the object, trying to figure out how and why it was able to locate the ones which were crushed. It didn't take long before he found out the reason. Arrays. Haha, this makes everything simpler. Gray laughed out excitedly. One of the few things he was confident in was arrays. Since he is a slow learner, he actually learned the basics of arrays multiple times from Chris, which made his foundation in it very strong. Even Chris was amazed by how good his foundation was. Now, all he needed to do was study the array and see what type of array it was. There are different types of arrays, and he learned all he could from Chris. Even if this wasn't part of the ones Chris taught him, with his basic knowledge, he would be able to figure out something. Void looked at Gray speechlessly as he focused on deciphering the arrays that were intricately drawn in the small wooden object. He almost couldn't take Gray's continuous learning habit. It was like he was never tired of learning. Void fell asleep from the boredom of watching Gray continuously staring at the wooden object and drawing down some lines on the ground. Gray would also contemplate on the lines he was drawing out. There were times he would have a complicated look, while at other times, he had a look of exhilaration. Before long, it was already morning. Void woke up and saw Gray was still engrossed in the object. He had drawn out so many lines that were across each other. That got Void confused for the first few seconds he looked at them. "Hey, wouldn't you be going for morning training?" Void asked when he saw that the sun was about to rise. "Oh, it's daybreak already. This will take longer than expected. Come on, let's head out." Gray stood up before walking out. An arcane plane elementalist could go days without sleep, much less an origin plane elementalist like Gray. He could even go 10 days without sleep. You're going out like that? Void asked when he saw what Gray was wearing. Oh, I forgot. I'll change right now. Gray came back in, changed into his training clothes before heading out. When they got to where he trained, Void disappeared into the forest to explore while Gray was training. Chapter 270. Gray stayed in the forest for just over 2 hours before heading back to the academy. He needed to head over for forging lessons. Since he wouldn't be going for the next 2 days, he wanted to focus fully on modifying and improving the wooden objects, if possible, create his own before any of his friends leaves the academy. They continued with the tempering process, before ending the lesson with the cooling process. With this, he was almost done with the basics of forging, but since his friends would be leaving soon, he had to wait a little longer before completing it. He didn't go for array lessons this time, since they were only going to repeat what he already knew. Although it would help him understand it better, nothing beats actual practical. On his way back home, he encountered an acquaintance. "Ho!" Damien called out when he saw Gray walking by. Gray turned around to see who it was. "Oh, it's you." Damien was the first summoner he saw before Reynolds became a high-grade summoner. After seeing him at the door that led to where the old expert's legacy was, he hadn't seen him again. "When did you return?" he asked while approaching Damien. "Yesterday." The 5th stage, that's the highest anyone from our academy who came out of the trial land got to," Damien said after noticing Gray was in the 5th stage of the origin plane. "You're not far from it yourself." Gray smiled lightly. Damien was already in the 4th stage. Had they been allowed to stay in the trial land for another week or 2, then he wouldn't have any problems with getting to the 5th stage. "When did you return?" asked Damien. 4 days ago, replied Gray. "And your friends, have they come out as well?" Damien asked again. He remembered always seeing them together, so he wanted to know if they came out as well. After all, not everyone who goes into the trial land walks out. "We came out together. We were lucky to find each when heading to the array that led outside," Gray explained. He spent a few minutes with Damien before leaving, of which he was the one who did most of the talking. Damien had always been the type who spoke less, so getting to actually have a conversation with him was extremely hard. Gray went over to Clouse's place and was lucky to find him at home. They headed over to Reynolds's place, before heading to Alice's. He told them of his plan to modify the wooden objects, so they could find each other when they've left the academy. "Will you be able to make it in time? From everything you've said, you haven't seemed to make any progress with it," Alice asked a little concerned. She could tell Gray was putting in so much effort just to make this thing, especially how he didn't attend array lessons. It was evident how much effort he was putting. "Well, if I can decipher the array, then modifying it will be too easy," Gray explained. He planned to change the process of locating each other. Unlike before when one of them had to break the wooden object before the others could find the person, this time, as long as they had it with them, they would be able to get a general direction of where each other were. He even had a bigger plan, being able to use it to send messages across a long distance. But he knew that wouldn't be possible for now, so he wanted to focus on just locating each other first. "If you can do it, then that's wonderful," Alice said, which the others agreed with. Gray's plan to make this communication device wouldn't only help them, but it would help their families as well. "Of course I can, since those guys could make it. I can modify it. All I need is just time. But I'm not too confident in the communicating part for now. I don't even know how to start with that. At least with the locating process. I can use their previous model as a guide." Gray shook his head sadly. "No need to beat yourself, being able to think of it is already amazing," Clouse encouraged. "Yeah, I'm not too bothered if I fail in doing that though. Locating you guys is enough for now." Gray nodded. They stayed for some time before Alice suggested they sparred. Clouse immediately rejected the idea since he was the weakest. But after the others agreed and gave him an ultimatum, he didn't have much of a choice. It was either he sparred with them, or they would gang up on him and beat him up. The group stayed together till just after sunset, and Gray even prepared something for them to eat. Alice had some items in her house that he used in making porridge. "You see, Ray, this is what it means to be a good cook," Clouse said after burping out loud. "I know, it's like he's blessed by a god or something. My mom's a great cook, but to be honest, I don't think she's near as good as he is, Reynolds replied while looking at the delicious porridge Void was eating. They were done with theirs, and Void's own was starting to call them. But recalling the cat's space element, they gave up the idea of stealing it. They each went to their houses after their meal. Gray soon went back to work. He noticed each of the objects didn't have the same erase. There's always a difference, even though it's small, there's always a difference. This made deciphering it hard, but he was already starting to get a rough idea of it. I should be able to completely decipher it within the next 5 days. Hopefully, he thought while looking at the different lines he had drawn on the papers on his table. Chapter 271. 3 days passed with Gray following the same routine. After his morning exercise, he would head back home to continue his research on the wooden objects. Later in the day, he would hang out with Clouse and the others. He got around 20 of the wooden objects from Quinn. Alice used one of them the last time, leaving him with just 19. He took the 2 that were with Clouse and Reynolds when he spoke with them previously about modifying the wooden objects. It took him 3 days to completely draw out each array drawn on the 19 wooden objects. He not only had to study them, but he also had to study the basics of arrays he got from Chris when he became his student. After he started getting the basic idea of the arrays, he went on to the next phase, crushing the wooden objects. This process is going to be harder than I thought Gray as he studied the wooden object while slowly crushing it. While crushing it, he noticed how the arrays on it converged to a particular point, before giving out an almost untraceable aura. The only reason he managed to sense it was because he was focused on it. After the crushed wooden object gave off the aura, Gray quickly took out 2 of the wooden objects from his spatial ring to see how it would react to it. He initially felt since each wooden object has a different array setup, the reactions will be different, but his conjecture was wrong. The objects all showed the same reactions, with 3 major arrays in each wooden object lighting up. That allowed the wooden objects to float. Once the wooden objects flew mid-air, 2 more major arrays lit up as well, but quickly died down. Before the wooden object's light dimmed as well. Why didn't it last as long as it usually does? Gray asked himself with his hand rubbing his chin. Without this stage, there was no way for him to modify it. But due to the short time it reacted, he couldn't continue with his research. He didn't hurry and carelessly crush another one, rather, he slowly started drawing out how the lines moved when he was crushing the wooden object. Before long, his table was filled up with multiple arrays carefully drawn out in different sheets of paper. 3 big books were on arrays. He got 2 of them from Chris, while the last one was from the Academy's library. Void, who was sitting on one of the chairs, curiously appeared on Gray's shoulder to view what he was working on. The different confusing lines almost threw him off his feet. He was not proficient in arrays, and seeing these lines made him less interested in it. Isn't it time to go out yet? He asked Gray, who was in thoughts while looking at the papers laid out in front of him. Just as Gray was about to answer the question, he paused and looked in the direction of the door. He could sense that someone was walking towards his compound, and the aura was also a familiar one. It was none other than Clouse. "Hey, I was just about to head over to your place," Gray said right after Clouse opened the door. Void stared at Gray with a bewildered look. He was the one who was trying to get Gray to go out a few seconds ago. Yet, Gray was lying about wanting to head over to Clouse's place. How shameless. "There's no need. I'm here now," Clouse said while walking over to take a seat. After taking his seat, he looked at the table that was stacked with papers that had different weird lines drawn on them. "How's your research going?" "Good. I'm getting increasingly closer to figuring out how they did it," Gray replied while arranging his research papers. An idea struck Gray just as he was keeping the papers. "Do you know anywhere I can get wood bats like this?" Gray took one of the wooden objects, showing it to Clouse, who was still seated. Clouse took the wooden object to inspect it, but he couldn't find the difference between it and normal wood. He knew of some special woods, but the one he was currently holding in his hands was not among the few he knew of. "Isn't it just like ordinary wood?" he asked while passing it back to Gray. Gray kept the wooden object before shaking his head. "No, it's a type of special wood called spiricotinu." "Spira what now?" asked a confused Clouse. "Spiricotinu," Gray said before taking out the wooden object once again. "You see these black spiral lines on the side of the wood?" Clouse nodded while looking at the black spiral lines Gray was pointing at. Apparently, that's where the wood got its name from. Gray explained. The wood is not the rarest type of wood out there, and because most people didn't know its uses, they don't attach much importance to it. Before Gray started his research on the wooden objects, he had zero knowledge of there being such a wood. He only got to know about the wood due to his meticulous nature. Since he was researching the wooden object, he thought he might as well find out what type of wood it was. He got to know about the wood in the Academy's library. I'm sure yet since this is the first time I'm hearing about it. But I think there might be someone I know in the city who might be able to have it. Clouse answered with a smile. Oh, that's great. Gray replied happily. Chapter 272. Gray and Clouse headed for the southern part of the city. After going in, Void was standing on Gray's shoulder like he usually does. He was curiously looking around. This was the first time he was coming to this part of the city, so he wanted to see every part of it. He wasn't the only one looking, even Gray was curiously staring at the place. This was also his first time here. This part of the city was a little lackluster when compared to the other parts of the city Gray had been to. The trio attracted a lot of attention from the people around. Firstly, Gray and Clouse were two handsome-looking young men who were nicely dressed compared to the people who were around the place. Secondly, Void's pitch-black fur has always been eye-catching. How did you know someone living in this part of the city? Gray couldn't help but ask when he saw the looks they were getting from the people around, especially some well-built men. For someone of Clouse's status, he never really thought he would know people in this area of the city. Gray had nothing against the people. After all, the city he came from was far from this part of the city in terms of the environment. Who says people with high social status shouldn't mingle with those in these rural areas? To be sincere, I trust the people I know here more than those two-faced rich people I know in this city. Clouse replied with a smile. I have nothing against people living here. I'm just surprised the person you were speaking of was staying in this part of the city, Gray said with a shrug. I got to know him one time when I went to an auction held in the city 4 years ago. There was a piece of wood I wanted to acquire, but he was hell-bent on getting it even after knowing that he was competing with the son of the mayor. Clouse chuckled as he explained. Did he get it? Gray asked. He could tell from Clouse's smile that he didn't allow the wood fanatic to acquire the wood easily. Haha, of course not. I'm the son of the mayor. There's no way some wood-loving weirdo would be richer than me. Clouse laughed out, which caused Gray to roll his eyes. I expected nothing less from you, given your character. Gray sneered. After seeing how devastated he was when he didn't obtain it, I felt compelled to give it to him. Besides, I didn't have any relevant use for it. Clouse said, still smiling, before adding with a sigh. If only I knew he didn't have any use for it other than studying it. I mean, who would waste their time doing something that boring? There's probably a reason for it, replied Gray. He's a pretty decent guy though, but only when he's not speaking about woods, Clouse said while taking a right turn. They continued on the path before making 2 more turns. They soon got to a shabby-looking house. Clouse knocked on the door, and after waiting for a few seconds, footsteps could be from inside the house. Click. The door was opened slightly, and the face of a young man could be seen peeking from inside the house. His hair was messy, and he had a scrawny appearance with scanty beards. His brown eyes matched his messy hair, giving him a strange glow. Oh, it's you. Come in, the young man said with a hint of excitement when he saw Clouse, before opening the door for him to come in. When Gray was about to go in, he looked at him with curious eyes, but didn't stop him from going in. I haven't seen you for a while now, young lord, he said after closing the door. Clouse was already seated, but since it was Gray's first time, he wasn't as comfortable as Clouse was. I traveled for training, Clouse said, not going deep into details. Okay. The wood fanatic was wise enough not to ask about it. So, who's your friend? Hugh, this is Gray. Gray. Hugh. Clouse introduced the duo to each other. It's nice making your acquaintance, Gray said, stretching out a hand. It's a pleasure knowing anyone who's friends with the young lord. Hugh shook Gray's hand gently, as if afraid shaking it too much would harm him. My friend is looking for a particular type of wood, and you're the only one I know who could help. Clouse explained why he brought Gray over. You came to the right guy. What can I help you with, young master? Hugh turned to Gray again after hearing what Clouse said. I'm searching for this Do you by chance have any of these? Gray put his hand in his pocket before bringing out one of the wooden objects. Hugh hurriedly took the wood before inspecting it. He even went as far as licking it. Do you know what type of wood this is? Gray nodded when he saw Hugh looking at him. I don't mean to intrude, but can you tell me what you want to use it for? Hugh asked softly, still studying the wood closely. Gray glanced at Clouse and saw him nodding his head. It was only after that did he tell Hugh what he wanted the wood for. Actually, this is only one of 8 types of wood that can be used for something like that. Hugh told Gray about what he knew about the wood. According to him, each of the 8 kinds of wood that were used for making such a tracking device had one exact characteristic. They were all amongst the hardest type of wood, yet, once the arrays were drawn in them, they would become very fragile, only when being crushed. They also had straight spaces in the wood. It was naturally made, and elementalists still haven't been able to figure out how it was possible. One would think the spaces in the wood would make them soft, but they were almost metal-like in terms of hardness. The spiricotinu was the 4th wood if they were ranked according to hardness. Hugh explained more things about making the devices. The hardness of the wood could help in the creation of the device. It was just like how using different grades of materials determines the grade of an item a blacksmith would craft. Do you have it with you? Clouse stopped Hugh before he drifted off completely. He knew if left alone, then Hugh would continue speaking of woods from now till the end of the day. He wouldn't even have any problems speaking about woods for a week. Yes, young lord. Hugh nodded before adding, come with me. Hugh motioned to Gray and Clouse before walking deeper into the house. There was surprisingly a hidden door in the house which led to a small room. Void, who was on Gray's shoulder, looked around curiously, but seriously. What's with you people and hidden door? Lack of spatial rings, I think. Given how they cherish their things, they wouldn't want others to easily access them. Of course, there's also the possibility of the place being a lab, Gray explained. Some of the things people make hidden rooms for are things they could easily keep in a spatial ring. Gray followed behind Hugh and Clouse before entering a huge room. It was like he walked into a forest. Different trees could be seen planted on the ground. Although they weren't that long, they still measured over 15 meters. This is not your usual hidden room. Chapter 273. Gray, Clouse, and Void stared at the mini forest, dumbfounded by the fact that someone would actually create something like this in their house. They didn't stay that way for too long, since they had to follow behind Hugh. Is this guy normal? Asked a stunned Void. Probably, Gray replied with uncertainty. He was just as shocked as Void, so he couldn't really conclude if Hugh was normal or not. Hugh took them to the middle of the small forest while explaining, I shattered my prize trees all over the forest. There are only 2 in the middle. Gray didn't say anything and followed behind without saying anything. Clouse had always felt Hugh was obsessed with trees, but he didn't think it was up to this point. They stopped in front of a tree that had dark red color. Its leaves were almost identical to that of a teak tree. This is the tree where you can get the spiricotinu wood, but I personally feel you could use the other woods since you know they're better. Hugh pointed at the tree before them before saying, I'm still learning. There's no need to waste your precious woods. Gray refused the idea of using any other wood. It was not that he didn't trust Hugh or anything, but he's learning with an already made item. Maybe after he had modified it, he would come back for a better wood. Okay, young master. Hugh didn't hassle over it. He gently cut out an almost 1 meter branch for Gray. This should be enough for you to make at least 20 of those things. Yes, thank you. Gray nodded while taking the tree branch. He studied it properly and was left amazed by the neat straight open spaces in it. It was almost like a creature opened it in it, but according to research and Hugh, it was naturally made. Gray asked for a sample of the 3 other trees Hugh said was better than the spiricotinu, which Hugh gladly obliged to. After getting them, they left the small forest and went back to the house. Just as Gray and Clouse were about to leave, why do you study trees? Seeing Hugh's small forest made Gray all the more curious as to why he loved trees this much. I believe trees are just like all other elements, something elementalists can control at will, Hugh explained. Gray let out a small "oh" sound but didn't ask any further. Hugh's reply was more than enough for him to understand. Hugh was trying to find or probably create a wood element or something like that, although he felt it was something impossible since trees was something that was actually living, unlike the other elements. He wished him good luck in his endeavors before he left the house along with Clouse. If someday Hugh was able to fulfill his dream, he would feel honored to get to know someone who created a new style. Hey, what are the probabilities of there already being a wood element? Void asked Gray as they headed out of this part of the city. I have no idea, but I'm not sure there is. Gray replied. You were also not aware of the space element until meeting me. So there's a chance of there being a wood element, said Void, after speculating for some time. Gray looked back at the side they were coming from, trying to etch the route to his head. He felt maybe he might come back to have a conversation with Hugh about his theories. They went back to the academy, and Gray headed straight for his house. Since he already had the material, he wanted to start his experiments immediately. Clouse headed over to meet up with Reynolds and Alice, accompanied by Void, who Gray asked him to take along. That day came to an end. The next day. This was the 5th day in a row that Gray hadn't slept, but he was still very much active. Over the night, he tried creating the arrays in the wood, but failed on all his tries. With each failure, he learned something new that increased the chances of successfully forming it the next time. The sun had already risen, but Gray didn't go for his usual morning physical training. He felt he was already very close to making the array. 2 hours later, he was able to successfully replicate one of the arrays drawn in one of the wooden objects. And as soon as he drew the last line, the other one he used in drawing it lit up. This was the first time Gray saw the wooden object having this type of reaction. Why are they glowing? He asked himself curiously. He got his answer a few seconds later. The 2 wooden objects flew closer to each other and connected. Then, it started releasing an intense heat wave that scared the hell out of Gray. Shit. No wonder none of them has the same array drawn on it. Gray cursed out before using his earth element to create a sphere that covered up the 2 wooden objects, which had already started to merge mid-air. This managed to seal the heat wave as well as the energy it was releasing. He sighed when he noticed this, but his pupils dilated, and his expression changed once again. When he noticed the strength of the wooden objects was on the rise, if it continued at this rate, then it would blow up his house. Oh no! Gray pointed in the direction of the forest, but he knew the chances of it reaching the academy walls was fleeting, much less going over to the forest. He ran in the other direction, while the earth sphere was sent in another direction. When he opened his door, he saw Clouse, Alice, and Reynolds walking into the compound. The trio was stunned when they saw Gray running out of his house with a panicked expression, but being friends with him, Clouse was the first to immediately turn around to make a break for it. Reynolds and Alice were a few seconds late. Just as Gray got to the small gate that led out of the compound. Boom. Chapter 274. Boom. A deafening explosion rang out behind Gray's house, frightening the hell out of Clouse and Reynolds. Even Void, who was with Alice, was stunned by the explosion. What did you do? Void asked Gray, who was still running. Nothing, it exploded on its own, Gray said while looking behind him to see the range of the blast. The explosion covered from his backyard to his house, completely demolishing it. It also destroyed the academy fence that was behind his house. Luckily, the space of each compound was huge, so it didn't get to the other houses by the side. My house! Gray yelled in dejection. Clouse and Reynolds walked closer to him when they saw that the explosion wasn't spreading anymore. Alice and Void also came closer to him. They were all looking at him with suspicious gazes. What happened? Did someone sneak into your house or something? Clouse asked while taking a glance at Gray's burning house, after the explosion started dying down. No, it was those wooden objects, replied Gray, who currently had a sour face. The explosion was bound to draw attention to him, especially given the size of it. He couldn't tell everyone what he was working on, but Instructor Blake and the principal were exceptions though. It didn't take long before the students around started flocking around Gray's house. Some instructors had also rushed to the scene as well. Instructor Blake was the first to arrive amongst the instructors. He was standing with Gray and his friends. So, you're saying that 2 wooden objects were the cause of this? Blake asked, a little confused. Yes, Gray nodded. Normal woods? Blake asked again. They are not entirely normal, Gray said, stressing the last parts of the statement. Gray told instructor Blake what the wooden objects were, and what he was trying to do. Of course, he didn't tell him about everything, only some parts of it. Blake cleared the area after getting to know what happened. It was an accident, and he didn't want to unsettle the students. He made up an excuse, but made sure to tell them it was an accident and not an enemy attack. "You four come to my office," Blake said before flying to his office. Gray looked at the trio with a wry smile before heading to the lightning hall. He knew instructor Blake was not going to let this go easily. At Blake's office. "Where did you get those?" Blake asked after Gray and the others walked into the office. This was the first time he was seeing this device. He had heard of it, but had never seen it before. Finding out that Gray and his friends had surprised him. "In the trial land, we encountered a group who used it." Gray told instructor Blake about their encounter with Quinn. Blake was thrilled by the story of them fighting against a darkness elementalist. Chris was the only one he had seen who had one of the two rarest elements, which was the light element. "You say they had a map of the place?" Blake asked. "Yes. They seem to be searching for something over the past years. They've gone inches." Gray handed the map over to him. Blake didn't miss the part where he took out a map from his seemingly previous empty-looking pocket. This discovery shocked him to no end. Given the size of the map, Gray's pocket was supposed to at least bulge out a little, but there was no difference even after taking out the map. "This is beyond me. We'll have to go see teacher," Blake said, standing up from his seat. He didn't know much about the trial land, other than the few things his teacher told him about it. He knew nothing else, so having the map wasn't of any use to him. Oliver was taking care of the few things remaining before he would officially leave the academy, when he sensed Blake walking towards his office with his son and his friends. As soon as he saw them coming, he knew they were definitely involved in the explosion that took place some minutes ago. After hearing everything from Blake, he looked at Gray and his before taking the map. "I heard a secret place opened up this time in the trial land. Even an expert's legacy was inherited." After looking at the map, there was a spot crossed in the map. It indicated a treasure or something. And according to some people who came out of the trial land, two huge black doors opened up, and they were filled with treasures as well as danger. "Yes, we came across the first door. The people who had that map were the ones who discovered it," Clouse explained. "What was inside?" Oliver asked with curiosity. "The Great Earth Essence liquid," Clouse said. Oliver narrowed his eyes when he heard about it. He knew what it could do, so hearing that some of it was actually located in the trial land amazed him, but he quickly removed it from his mind. "Okay, you shouldn't continue that research of yours in the academy, since it seems dangerous. Go to your teacher's valley when next you plan to do it," Oliver said before dismissing them. Gray was trying to make something he could use to contact his friends, so he didn't want to stop him. After sending the group out, Blake was the only one left in office. "There's something about senior Chris student." Blake told him what happened in his office. "No need to worry about him. He doesn't have any malicious intent towards Clouse." Oliver waved it off. "I know, but his background is suspicious. Not just that, but if he's able to successfully create this thing, then he would be able to locate us at any time of his choice." Blake added, "If he didn't trust you, do you think he would come clean with you?" Oliver asked with a smile. Blake kept quiet for a few seconds. "I was only trying to be cautious. I can tell he wouldn't do anything to harm Clouse, but if he loses that thing after making it, then we would be in danger. Let me worry about that, okay?" Oliver shook his head when he saw how cautious Blake was. "Yes, teacher." Blake bowed before leaving the office. "I'll see if the little boy can successfully make that. If he can, then he's as much of a genius as his teacher," Oliver muttered while looking through the window. Chapter 275. "Haha, great. Now we're roommates," Clouse said as they walked back to his house. Gray nodded, but still felt disgruntled inside. Although living with Clouse would be fun and all, he liked the privacy he previously had in his house. Each house in the academy had only one room, so either he slept in the parlor, or he would sleep alongside Clouse in the room. None wasn't that bad, since it was Clouse. "I can't stay in teacher's house since he's not around. I'll have to make a small shack like his that I can stay in whenever I go there," thought Gray. "Crap." Gray suddenly stopped before muttering. "What's wrong?" asked Reynolds. "I just realized I'm currently clothless. Shit." Gray rubbed his forehead a little depressed. If he knew something like this would happen, he would have kept his clothes in his storage ring. You'll get new ones, no need to worry about it. Clouse shrugged before adding, have you forgotten about the coins we took from that mayor's mansion? After hearing this, Gray recalled about it and nodded. He had forgotten about the coins they stole from the mayor's villa. It's probably because I'm too worked up from what I was doing, thought Gray. Oh, and Gray, Clouse suddenly called. After seeing Gray look at him, he said, please don't do that in my house as well, or we'll likely have to move to Reynolds' house. Reynolds laughed out when he heard Clouse begging Gray not to cause his house to explode as he did to his. It was an accident, Gray said with a long face. I know, I'm only begging you not to repeat it in my house. Clouse with a chuckle, before adding, you can totally do it in Ray's house though, I don't think he would mind. They continued messing around with Gray till they got to Clouse's house. They stayed together till later in the day, and for the first time in 3 days, Gray took a long break from working. This break was much needed since other than spending a few hours with his friends during the past 3 days, he focused more on his work. The next day, Gray went for his normal morning training, but didn't come back to Clouse's house. He went to his teacher's valley to continue his research. His friends would be leaving soon, so he had to complete his work before they left the academy. His small breakthrough from the previous help shortened the time of his work, since he was starting to get it. Now, all he wanted to do was find a way to create the little difference in the arrays on the wooden object he was working on. 1 week later, at the gate of the Lunar Academy, the 4 friends could be seen standing just outside the gate with one of them carrying a backpack. From the looks of it, it seemed like the person was about to leave. Can't you stay a little longer? I'm already almost done with them. Gray asked Reynolds, who held his backpack tightly. I'm sorry, bud, but I can't stay longer. Don't worry, you wouldn't have any problems with locating me. Just head to Hildria's city. My family can easily be found in the city. Reynolds apologized to his friends. Okay, take this with you. Although you might not be able to locate me with it, I can find you once I'm done with the first one. Gray handed one of the wooden objects he just finished making to him. Reynolds took it before bidding his farewell to his friends. We'll see each other soon. With that, he decisively turned around and headed to Lunar City. He needed a horse since Hildria's city wasn't close to Lunar City. Gray and the others watched on as Reynolds' shadow disappeared from view. Open quote, sigh, we're left with just us now. Clouse sighed while looking at the duo left. He too would be leaving soon as well, and unlike Reynolds, he wasn't the one who was making the decision. Yeah, I'll need to work faster. It'll be a shame if I'm still not done with them yet when you guys are leaving as well. Gray said with determination. No need to work yourself up, bud. The worst case scenario is that you'll just give us a wooden object like the one you gave to Ray. Clouse comforted Gray as they headed back inside the academy. Yeah, take it one step at a time, added Alice. Gray nodded and looked around the academy compound. In the end, he would be alone in here soon. He had always expected what he wanted to do to be difficult, so having to already make some progress was something he should be proud of. But seeing that his friends would most likely leave one by one before he was done annoyed him. After going back to Clouse's house, he headed straight to his teacher's valley. He left Void with Clouse, so he could check on them with him, since they could communicate from such a distance. 3 days went by when a piece of news spread across the academy. The principal had resigned, as well as all the head instructors in the academy. Most of the highly ranked instructors were leaving the academy, sending the students into disarray. Gray was left dumbstruck by the news. He didn't think most of the instructors would be leaving as well. This made him feel there was something bigger going on behind the scenes. He had always felt the sudden resignation of the principal, as well as his wanting to leave the city, was strange. Coupled with this news, he felt unsettled staying in the academy. Even Instructor Blake was leaving as well. Different rumors spread around the academy regarding the sudden resignation of the principal, the head instructors, and most of the highly ranked instructors in the academy. The one which spread around most was that their resignation had something to do with the upcoming war. According to it, the principal is afraid of fighting against the Azure Empire, and that he was a coward. He coerced the head instructors and the other instructors into leaving the academy as well. No one knew where this rumor came from, but as soon as it came out, it spread over the academy like wildfire. Even the people in the city knew of it. Chapter 276. In Oliver's office. Teacher, this must be the work of the Emperor. He wants to sully your name since you're leaving in such a way, Blake said in an annoyed tone. I know, but what's the use of fighting with them? That is exactly what they want. I think they're trying to see if Chris is around. Given his temperament, he would have killed a few people by now. Heh, Oliver chuckled at the end of his statement. HMPH, underhanded tactics, Blake snorted coldly. After finding out what the Emperor was trying to do some time ago, he hated them strongly, especially because he would most likely lose Delia because of this. Since she left the academy the last time, she hadn't returned even till now. He had even headed to her family's compound, but she wasn't there. You still haven't seen your little girlfriend? Oliver chuckled when he saw Blake's expression. It was like he could see through him. No, I've searched every possible place I can think of. Blake shook his head with a sad face. She's fine, don't worry too much. I believe she will show up before we leave. Oliver consoled him. Blake nodded but didn't say anything else. Just as he was about to leave, he asked, when are we leaving? 2 days from now. Tell that little nuisance to be prepared, Oliver said. Yes, teacher. Blake bowed before leaving the office. Alice's house. Alice and Clouse could be seen sitting outside with serious expressions. Why isn't Gray here yet? Alice asked while looking at Void, who was lying leisurely on a chair. Void confirmed he asked him to come, right Void? Clouse asked, looking at Void. Void nodded when he saw them looking at him. He had told Gray to come over. It had been almost 30 minutes now, but he still wasn't here. Alice and Clouse were just about to continue when Void looked in the direction of the small gate that led into the compound. Gray's figure could be seen walking towards them. He looked a little exhausted from working too much. Hey, what's up? Gray asked as he walked into the compound. Haven't you been hearing about the rumors around the academy? Alice asked with a raised brow. I have, but why are you guys bothering about it? You should know this is the plan of some people to spoil the name of the principal. Gray replied nonchalantly. Although he wasn't close to the principal, he knew he wasn't the type to shirk away from a fight. This must be a plot by some people. Why aren't you bothered? Clouse asked. Because given what the principal had done for the academy and the city, the people wouldn't believe it. Of course, there would be people who would believe it nonetheless, but it doesn't really matter. Gray explained with a shrug. The fact that all the head instructors and almost all the high-ranked instructors willingly resigned along with the principal showed how united they were. How could someone who could build such a great academy be someone who would run away because of a war? Gray didn't believe any word the people were saying. You're more relaxed than I am, Clouse said. I'm not, I'm exhausted. Worrying about the stupidity of people is not something I usually do. You and Ray are more than enough for me to think about. If I have to add every other person out there, I might die. Gray chuckled before taking a seat. Alice burst out laughing when she heard Gray's comment, Clouse on the other hand snorted. How are things with your research? Asked Alice. Going well. Gray paused mid-sentence before adding, I think. You must have blown up the place, right? Clouse asked with a smirk. Gray called him stupid a few moments ago. Now that he had the chance to get back at him, of course he would. Gray hesitated before replying, No, I did not. Ha ha, you're lying. How many times did it blow up? Clouse laughed when he saw Gray hesitating. Okay, fine. They blew up maybe once or twice. But I'm increasingly getting closer to successfully making it. Gray replied truthfully. After the last time the 2 wooden objects exploded, he made sure not to replicate any more arrays. But to his surprise, after he made his own set of arrays in the wooden object, it exploded. There was one time when it exploded while he was still working on it. If not for his quick reaction and his strong physical defense, he would have been injured. Luckily for him, his teacher's house was still intact. Apparently, his teacher created a defensive array around his house, so even when the explosion goes close to it, it doesn't cause any damages. Gray still hasn't been able to find out the cause of the explosions, but he had been making improvements on it. His only concern was that he was running out of wood. Ha ha! Did you almost die? Clouse asked in the middle of his laughter. Gray glared at him, which made Alice giggle. She always enjoyed being with the boys. They are always fun to be with. They stayed in her place for a little while before heading to the city. Clouse took them to the underground fight club they visited before they left for the competition. Alice felt a little downcast because she couldn't fight due to her strength. This was the only thing she hated about being in the origin plane, not being able to fight like she usually does. Other than sparring with the boys, she doesn't fight as she previously did. When they got back to the academy, Alice told them she would be leaving the next day. Her father sent someone to come get her. She would have left if not for wanting to hang out with the boys one more time. She didn't know when next they would be able to hang out like this again. Gray felt more pressure on his work, but the truth was, he was already trying his best. But he still hasn't been able to make it till now. Chapter 277. The next day, Gray, Alice, and Clouse could be seen at the academy's gate. A silver carriage could be seen waiting by the side. "I'll miss you guys. Hopefully, we'll see each other soon," Alice said while hugging the duo. "We'll miss you too. Try to stay out of trouble. You know we aren't there to help," Clouse advised. "I should be the one telling you that," Alice giggled after she replied. Given Clouse's bad mouth, he was bound to offend people wherever he went. "I'm awesome. People are just jealous they're not my friend. That's why they feel angered when I speak," Clouse said righteously. "Ha ha. I'll keep that in mind." Alice laughed lightly before adding, "Bye guys." "Goodbye." Clouse and Gray waved her off as he walked to the carriage waiting for her. Gray made sure to give her one of the wooden objects, so he could track her after he was done making the perfect one. He planned to visit all of them before he headed out to search for his parents. The Battle of the Empires had nothing to do with him. While they were going back to Clouse's house, Gray was met with more bad news. Clouse was leaving the next day. He decided to spend the rest of the day with him. It wasn't like he was going to successfully make it today. Besides, Reynolds and Alice took the normal type. It wouldn't change anything if Clouse took that type as well. Later that day, news of the 12th prince dying spread across the entire empire. According to what was said, the 12th prince was killed by people from the Azure Empire. This caused a spark in the empire, and a small brawl even broke out between both the Killen Empire's army and the Azure Empire's army that was stationed at the border between both empires. In the Silver Moon restaurant, Clouse, Gray, and Void were eating when they overheard some people speaking of the battle between both empires and the 12th prince's supposed death. That's strange. I could swear I saw him when I was being chased by that ice dragon. He was heading for the exit, and other than the dragon chasing after me, there were no other magical beasts that could threaten his group from that area to the exit, said Gray. What if he was attacked by those guys when he came out? Clouse speculated. Not likely, they only attack those in the 4th stage of the origin plane and above. Gray shook his head. He recalled the 12th prince was either in the 2nd or 3rd stage of the origin plane. Although he was not too sure about which of the 2 stages he was in, he was certain the 12th prince was not in the 4th stage. You never can tell, maybe they decided to attack him anyway. Clouse said he didn't care if the 12th prince was killed in the trial land, or outside the trial land. It was none of his business. Yeah, by the way, do you know where you're heading to? Gray changed the topic. The 12th prince was not someone he wanted to think about. If he didn't encounter him in the trial land, then he wouldn't even know there was a 12th prince. Nope. How about you? Where do you plan to start your search? Clouse shook his head before asking. I haven't decided yet, but I'll visit Red City one more time before starting, replied Gray. I'll ask my dad if he could help out. They usually run background checks on each student, Clouse said while tapping his finger on the table. They do? Gray asked with a bewildered expression. Of course, it's not like the academy takes in that many students anyway, Clouse answered before he started eating. Gray felt slightly hopeful even if they couldn't tell him where his parents were. He might be able to get some clues if they could tell him where his parents came from. After eating, Gray and Clouse headed for the principal's house. It was already late, and according to Clouse, his father had stopped going to the office and had handed everything over to the next principal. Well, not exactly everything since he was still staying in the principal's compound in the academy. At the principal's house, Gray and Clouse were obediently sitting, waiting for Clouse's father to come out. This was the first time Gray came to a house other than that of students, and he was flabbergasted by what he saw. The house of the principal was exactly the same as that of the students. It was unexpected. He had always expected the houses of the instructors would be better than that of students, but seeing the principal's house, he changed his mind. Oliver walked in, and Clouse told him the reason for their visit. No need to check his files. There's nothing you can find about his background. The only reason he was allowed to stay in the academy was because of Chris. Gray and Clouse exchanged glances, not understanding what the principal was saying. Sorry, sir, but I don't understand what you mean. Gray voiced out. There are no records of your parents. According to our intel, they appeared in Red City out of nowhere. At that time, your mother was already pregnant with you. Your dad rarely stayed at home before your birth, but after you were born, he stayed at home more frequently, before suddenly disappearing 10 years ago, explained Oliver. Gray couldn't refute a single word, since that was exactly what his neighbors also said. When he asked about the origin of his parents, he initially thought they didn't want to tell him. He had asked his mother about it on some occasions as well, but she always told him the time wasn't right yet. Different questions ran through his head after the principal told him what he knew. It was like a layer of mystery was covering his origins and the whereabouts of his parents. Now, the only way he could locate them was if he knew where they originally came from before staying in Red City. They left the principal's house after getting the answer they came in search of. Where did they come from? Gray asked himself the same question over and over again for the rest of the night. Chapter 278. Gray was left bothered by the question for the rest of the day, but he made sure to have fun with Clouse while he was still here. The next day soon reached, and it was time for Clouse to leave. Gray followed them to the academy's gate. Why don't you come with us? Oliver offered when he saw the sad expression of both boys. Thank you, sir, but I'll have to decline. I'll come to visit when I'm done with my research. Gray smiled. Oliver didn't say any more, since he only asked him to come because of Clouse. Goodbye, bud. Hopefully, you can get a girlfriend before we meet again, Clouse said while patting Gray on the shoulder. I'm not interested in that for now, Gray replied. The chances of you having a girlfriend without my help is basically zero anyway. I was just saying so it wouldn't look like I don't care. Clouse chuckled. Just as they were about to leave, Clouse turned around while taking a small book out of his backpack. Here, I almost forgot. He tossed the book over to Gray, who caught it and looked at the cover curiously. On it was written, The Ways of Life. What's this? Gray was forced to ask when he saw the title of the book. The Ways of Life. It was written by me. It's not complete yet, but I felt you should have it since you need it, explained Clouse. He suddenly started rummaging through his backpack once again. Oh, there's also this. I think you actually need this more, Clouse said after taking out a second small book from his backpack. When Gray caught it, he looked at the title and couldn't help but smile awkwardly. On it was written How to Get and Handle a Woman Properly. He had always seen Clouse as a nutjob, but it seems like Clouse keeps surprising him every single time. What the hell does he want to use these books for? You see, you're not the only one who was working hard because of our departure. The reason I didn't give Ray any of these was that the first book wouldn't be able to help him, and unlike you, the second book isn't needed, Clouse explained, which caused Gray to facepalm. Oliver and Blake, who were waiting for him, curiously checked the titles of both books and couldn't help but shake their heads. Clouse always finds new ways to amaze them. How did he even come up with writing these things? I've always known you were not normal, but now it seems to call you crazy is a disrespect to crazy people. Gray looked at his friend with a smile. Ha ha, I'm the king of crazy, Clouse declared before turning around. He continued waving at Gray, even though he wasn't facing him anymore. Gray watched on as the group left, and it was like the last reason he was staying in the Lunar Academy was gone. He totally lost all interest in the academy. Sigh, a new era is about to begin in the once prestigious Lunar Academy. Hopefully, it keeps the reputation the principal built over the years, Gray thought as he headed to his teacher's valley. Oliver, Blake, and Clouse were walking on the pathway when Clouse noticed Blake was putting on a sad face. Are you okay? He asked as he went closer to Blake. No, Blake shook his head sadly. Haha, he's sad because he can't see his little girlfriend anymore. Oliver laughed out. Teacher, Blake called out. Haha, I'll stop talking about it. Oliver laughed out again. Do you want my help? I might not be good at many things, but in matters concerning women, I can proudly call myself an expert, Clouse said while thumping his chest. Blake glared at Clouse. If not for the fact that they were still in the open, he would have already started beating him up. You know, I even wrote a book about how to get and handle a woman. Why don't I give you a copy? How does that sound? Clouse asked. That's it, Blake said before grabbing Clouse and spanking his butt with a small lightning hand he created, which threw Oliver into a fit of laughter. They had always had the relationship of a family. Blake became Oliver's student a few years after Clouse was born. They had always taken each other as brothers, with Blake being the responsible elder brother, and Clouse being the naughty younger brother who caused problems wherever he went. While Blake was still teaching Clouse a lesson, he suddenly jolted and looked ahead of them. Why are you bullying him? A delicate voice was heard ahead of them as a young lady who covered part of her face, leaving only her eyes visible, appeared from the side of the bush on the pathway. Delia, Blake muttered softly, letting go of Clouse who fell on the ground. Oh, she's back. I knew she would return. This was why I refused to give you the book, Clouse said loudly, making sure Delia heard him. Blake tried closing Clouse's mouth as soon as he started speaking, but he was unfortunately too late. He knew whatever Clouse was going to say was nothing good. Being close to him since he was young, he knew Clouse would find a way to get back at him for beating him. What book? Delia asked curiously as she approached the group. Blake gave Clouse a death stare, but the only thing he saw in Clouse's eyes was a young Phyllis bastard. Oliver laughed when he realized Clouse was about to start one of his pranks again, and Blake was his unfortunate target. Bribe me, or else I'll spill everything, Clouse whispered in Blake's ear before Delia got close to them. I didn't even do anything. Blake felt like crying. Clouse was someone who wouldn't admit defeat easily. She's already close. Well, your time is up, Clouse said before moving closer to Delia. Blake tried getting hold of his hand, but he quickly escaped. What book did he ask you to give to him? Delia asked with her delicate and serene voice. Clouse threw a wicked smile at Blake before saying, it's a book titled How to Get and Handle a Woman Properly. Oh, Delia blinked and looked at Blake oddly. This will teach him not to mess with me, Clouse thought. Since he knew he couldn't beat Blake physically, then he might as well torture him emotionally, or in this case, get Delia to do the dirty work for him. It's not what you think. He's saying rubbish. You can ask teacher. He can vouch for me, Blake said nervously. Oliver laughed as the group continued walking, while Blake tried to settle the small chaos Clouse caused. Blake was finally able to settle things with Delia after some time. Of course, Clouse would occasionally butt in. He gave them some time to talk, since he could see how much Blake missed her. Teacher, did you know she would be here? Blake approached Oliver and asked. Nope. Oliver shook his head with a smile. Oh really? Then why were you so adamant that we should take this route? Blake asked with a sneer. Because of my gut feelings, Oliver replied, which made Clouse burst into laughter. It had been a long time since he saw his father this carefree. It was almost like being the principal and mayor changed him. Thankfully, he had stepped down from both positions. Chapter 279. After Oliver, Blake, and Clouse left, the new principal and head instructors were announced. They were all from Capital City, making some people speculate about the Emperor having a hand in the stepping down of the previous principal. All this though had nothing to do with Gray. He was currently cooked up in his teacher's valley. Once he was done with his research, he planned to immediately leave the academy. The only thing that made him feel a little down was that he hadn't completely learned about the basics of being a forge master. Guess I'll have to buy books concerning it and learn for myself, thought Gray. 5 days later, Gray was about to come out of his teacher's valley when Void suddenly told him to wait. What's it? He asked curiously. He was already at the tunnel, a few more steps, and he would come out of the place. There are people outside, they seem to be searching for something, Void replied. Are they coming towards the rock? Asked Gray. No, I don't think they know what this rock is, but from how they are searching, it looks like they are searching for a hidden passage or something. Void continued monitoring the people outside. Gray's senses weren't as sharp as Void's, so he couldn't sense past the array his teacher placed on the rock. He waited patiently with Void constantly giving updates. The people outside checked everything outside, including the rock, but didn't find any clues to where any hidden passages were. After they stayed for almost 10 minutes, they finally left. Gray sent Void outside to eavesdrop on their conversations while they were still there, and according to him, the people knew about his teacher's hidden passage, but they didn't know the exact location of it. The reason they stayed for almost 10 minutes was that they were discussing with the instructor who took them here. Why are they searching so desperately for teacher? Could it be that the resignation of Clouse's dad had something to do with him? Thought Gray. While he was thinking about this, Void told him a piece of news that worried him. The people were looking for him as well. They said Gray always came towards this part of the forest and would stay for hours without leaving. There was one time the instructor came in a few minutes after Gray entered the forest, but he was nowhere to be seen. It was like he disappeared into thin air. The instructor said if they could find Gray, then they might be able to locate the hidden passage, since he felt Gray knew about it. The instructor also said he saw Gray heading into the forest some days ago, but he didn't see him come out even till now. This is bad. I can't stay here for too long, or else I might be in danger. I may not know what is going on, but it definitely has something to do with teacher, which has rubbed off on me. Gray fell into deep thoughts. This discovery made him feel threatened. It had only been 5 days since Clouse's father left the position, yet the academy was no longer safe for him, a student. What do we do now? Void asked after coming back to the tunnel. He could tell the issue wasn't as simple as it seems. There's a chance of them being captured if found. It's still too early for us to leave. I'm confident that no one would be able to get into the valley without my help. Since teacher is gone and instructor Blake and the principal are also gone, I'm the only one who can come in here and go as I please. Gray said while rubbing his chin. Okay? I have no problems with staying here. Void shrugged. I'll need your help to navigate through the forest unnoticed. I'm out of wood, and I need to get more from that Hugh guy, said Gray. Void nodded before vanishing and appearing outside once again. He scouted the entire area, as well as outside the forest to know where the people were positioned. He came back 30 minutes later with more bad news for Gray. There's no way you can use the same route we used in coming here. People are positioned in every corner of the academy. It will be hard to pass through them without being seen. Void reported his findings to Gray, which placed him in more thoughts. We'll take the longer route then. It's only an added 4 hours. Gray quickly came to a decision. This time, he would take as much wood as possible from Hugh. He was already very close to successfully making it. If he could get a few more array lines right, then he would be done with his project. The reason it's taking so long was that instead of using the one from the previous wooden object, he started making his own arrays, because those ones always blew up, even after he made some changes. Since he started using his own set of arrays, the wooden objects rarely blew up, only that he hadn't been able to get what he wanted. Gray went out after getting a go-ahead from Void. With Void's help, he managed to come out from the forest from another side. He saw some people who were traveling towards Lunar City and joined them. They soon got to the city before Gray separated from the group. They encountered something he had never seen before at the city gate. The guards were now collecting entry fees from each person coming into the city. It has only been a few days since the handover, yet they've already started taking fees. Gray thought after entering the city. When in the city, he heard about the different changes that had not only started taking place in the city, but the academy as well. Most of the remaining instructors were dropped, and in the past 2 days, more than half of the older students have left the academy. This outcome was in no way what the Emperor or the Crown Prince hoped for, but this also showed how much the students liked the previous principal and instructors. Chapter 280. They seem to have ramped up the security. That doesn't seem good, Gray thought while he was heading over to Hugh's house. He only thought the guards at the gate were the only ones increased, but now he noticed even the ones patrolling the city were increased as well. There were even more groups this time. When he got to the alley before Hugh's house, Void told him that there were guards hiding around the place. Damn it. What do they want me for? Gray cursed out. There is no way the guards were here because of Hugh. That leaves only one possibility. They were waiting for someone, and given how they have been searching for him, he felt he was probably the one. There's also the possibility that he wasn't the one though, but he wouldn't want to take that chance. Is there a way we can go inside undetected? Asked Gray. I can, but you can't, replied Void. Shit. If only I've comprehended the space element. I wouldn't even bother with any of these people. I'd just go in and out as I wish. Gray thought sadly. Since meeting Void and training with him in the trial land, he had been trying so hard to comprehend the space element. Currently, it was the most useful element he knew of, but it was harder than the other elements. Luckily for him, he not only had Void, but he also had a spatial ring. This had greatly improved his contact with the element. But even after so long since discovering the space element, he still hasn't been able to sense it in the chaos space. He had tried comprehending the Great Void technique, but had been unable to. Although, he felt that he wasn't far from sensing it in the chaos space, given how much he uses the spatial ring. Without the spatial ring, Void, and the Great Void technique, it would probably take him months, if not even years, before he would be able to make any progress with the space element. I'll have to disguise myself, said Gray. With a plan in mind, he walked back into the city. Since he was coming to this part of the city, which was the slums of the city, he decided to dress like one of them. He even decided to put a scar on his face, just in case those guards knew what he looked like. 2 hours later, Gray was back in the alley. Now, he was different from how he previously looked. He had a scar on one part of his face that slightly entered the other side, like that of someone who suffered from burns. The scar covered almost half his face and went past his nose to the other side of his face, ending just under his right eye. Added with the clothes he was wearing, it was hard to associate him with the previous handsome-looking Gray. Now he was wearing casual plain-looking trousers with a loose shirt. He even found a way to make his skin look tanned, unlike his previous pale-like skin. They shouldn't be able to recognize me with these, right? Gray asked Void. Void nodded with a tired look. This was the 9th time Gray was asking this question. Gray was the most cautious person he had ever seen. Even after disguising himself to the extreme, he was still scared of being recognized by people who might have only seen a drawing of him. Even those who had been with him for so long would have a hard time recognizing him, much less these people. After getting confirmation from Void, Gray walked out of the alley and walked straight for Hugh's house. He told Void to go in on his own. He noticed different spiritual senses observing him when he was approaching Hugh's house, but he remained calm and collected. I really need to thank Teacher, he thought. He used a cloaking array that was able to perfectly hide his plane from people, even those in the early stages of the Overlord plane. The guards around this place were only in the mid stages of the Origin plane, so he had no problem with his disguise. To them, he was only a 6th stage Arcane Plane Elementalist. Knock, knock. After a few seconds, he heard Hugh's footsteps. When Hugh opened the door, he was taken aback by the person who was standing outside his house. He didn't recall ever knowing or seeing this person. Gray looked at him and said only one word, Spiricoltinu. Hugh quickly connected the dots before welcoming him inside with a smile. He closed the door the moment Gray stepped in. I don't mean to pry, young master, but did you offend the new mayor? Hugh asked as soon as he turned around. I don't even know him, but why do you ask? Gray answered before asking. Firstly, you're disguised, which means you're hiding from some people, Hugh said before taking a seat. Secondly, according to Hugh, 3 days after the new mayor took charge, he personally came to see him, asking him some questions about his relationship with Gray in particular. He asked what Gray wanted when he came to visit him the last time he visited him. Don't worry, I didn't tell him anything, Hugh said when he saw Gray's expression. Gray sighed in relief but didn't say anything. He waited patiently so Hugh would continue speaking. Hearing the amount the mayor offered, Gray sucked in a cold breath. That was a lot of money. Even some families wouldn't mind betraying a family member, much less someone they knew nothing about. Gray's impression of Hugh skyrocketed when he saw how loyal he was. It was just as Clouse said, these people were more trustworthy than those two-faced rich people he knew. So, what brings you here? Hugh asked after he was done telling Gray about the guards that came looking for him. I'm out of wood. I need more, a little bigger than the one I took the last time. Gray went straight to the point. Okay, come with me. Hugh stood up before walking in the direction of where the secret passage was located in his house. By the end of the passage, after leaving the living room, Hugh exclaimed softly when he saw Void on Gray's shoulder just before they entered the secret room. He didn't recall seeing Void with Gray when he opened the door for him to come inside. When did the cat come in? He couldn't help but ask. I hid him, replied Gray. Oh, I see, it'll be easy for people to recognize you, since you're known for always having a small black cat on your shoulder. So you hid it. Hugh nodded in enlightenment before turning around to open the secret passage. As soon as he turned around, Gray's expression changed. Shit. How did I forget about that? Luckily, I wasn't on your shoulder when you came out of the alley, said Void. Yes, but they must already be aware of me coming into the city. Why exactly are they looking for me? Gray asked. He felt Hugh wasn't the only one who the new mayor must have visited. He might have gone to see the other few people he was acquainted with in the academy. This was already past just because of his teacher. For the mayor to move personally meant it was more than what he thought. Chapter 281. Lunar City, the mayor's office. My lord, I have something to report. A guard's voice could be heard from outside the office. The new mayor was currently seated on his seat, accompanied by two men. He had a slim build and short grey hair with a mustache. He looked to be around his late 30s. Come inches, he said calmly. The guard entered the office and bowed with a knee to the ground. Speak. My lord, a young man was sighted entering the city with a black cat on his shoulder. We believe he's the one you have been looking for, the guard reported. Where is he? The mayor stood up instantly on hearing this. He headed to the southern part of the city but disappeared soon after, the guard reported with his head still bowed. Fools. How can a brat in the origin plane disappear just like that? Search the city, he's still inside. Lock the gates, no one goes in or out, the mayor ordered. The guard bowed before leaving hastily to give out the mayor's orders. After the guard left, the two men who were seated by the side looked at the mayor curiously. One of them couldn't refrain from asking any more. What did the boy do to His Majesty? The mayor sat down before looking at the two men. Just like him, they were both from capital city as well. He has something the Emperor DESIRS. Huh, something the Emperor DESIRS. What could that possibly be? The second man asked. I don't know, but the Emperor said the boy brought it out of that place. At Hugh's house, Gray was oblivious to what was currently going on in the city. They had just entered the secret room, and he was thinking of ways to hide the wood in his spatial ring without Hugh finding out. But he knew it was impossible. With no other choice in mind, he decided to hide it after getting to the alley, just like the time he came with Clouse. While Gray was thinking about how to leave, a weird scene was currently playing out. Hugh was actually apologizing to the tree before cutting it. He was even holding the tree tightly, making Void, who was watching, feel uncomfortable. This guy is just plain weird. It's a fucking tree. Just cut it and be done with it, said Void. Let him be. As long as I'll get what I came for, he can do whatever he wants with the trees. It's none of our business, Gray said nonchalantly. After Hugh was done, he cut out a branch that was double the size of the one he previously gave to Gray. Gray gladly thanked him before taking it. With what he came for, he soon left his house with the big wood branch on his shoulder. The guards who were stationed outside the house instantly lost interest in him when they saw that he came out with a piece of wood. They took him for someone who was just as weird as Hugh, a wood-loving moron. When Gray got to the alley, he checked if he was still being monitored. But after seeing that no spiritual sense was locked on him, he heaved a sigh before keeping the wood in his spatial ring. With this, I wouldn't need to leave the valley until I'm done. Gray clenched his fist before walking in the direction of the gate. This time, he not only kept his disguise on, but Void was nowhere to be seen. After he heard what Hugh said, he knew he messed up when he entered the city. But what kept bugging him was that he didn't know why the new mayor was so adamant on getting him. What did he have or know that brought so much interest to him? When he got close to the city gate, he knew his conjecture was right. The guards definitely recognized him when he entered the city previously. Hey, can't you just jump over the wall? The other side is very free, Void, who was nowhere to be seen, advised. No, this isn't a small city like Xivia City. There's a huge detection array around the walls. The guards would instantly be aware once I do that, replied Gray. He was only able to know this because he was friends with the son of the previous mayor. Clouse, being a good friend, told him a lot of the city, especially after his father stepped down. He even told him where the city treasury was located in the mayor's compound, in case he planned on robbing the new mayor. What do we do now? Asked Void. Wait it out. It's not like I'm in a hurry anyway. I'm going to a tavern, said Gray. It's been a long time since I tried comprehending the elements. I've been so focused on the space element that I forgot I have a technique for the darkness element, he thought. There's no way the mayor would keep the city closed for the entire day. Even if he does, it's none of his business. He could even keep it closed for a month. It was none of his business. Gray went to a tavern that was close to the mayor's compound. With his disguise on, he didn't have a problem with taking a room. When he entered his room, Void appeared, but Gray didn't bother with him. He sat cross-legged and entered a semi-conscious state. His spiritual self appeared in the chaos space. Other than my fire element, the rest are either blue or purple grades. Instead of increasing the ones on purple, I should find a way to get a new element. It's been so long I had a new element, Gray muttered out. While in this spiritual state, he couldn't take the things in his spatial ring here. Since he planned to comprehend the darkness element, he came out of the chaos space and brought out the darkness element techniques he got from Quinn. He had a lot of time in his hands, so he started slowly studying it. Chapter 282. Gray stayed in his room for the rest of the day without taking a single step outside. He didn't even check if the city gate was still blocked or not. He focused fully on his learning. Hey, create a small darkness ball. I need to observe it. Gray turned to Void after not getting a result from the scroll. He never really expected to make any progress immediately, so he wasn't disappointed by his lack of results. Okay. Void nodded before making a small mass appear in the shape of a ball. He had been idle since they got here, so doing this was better than nothing. Gray watched as the ball of black mass floated mid-air. He carefully observed its properties. After watching it for a while, he picked a cup from the table and gradually placed it in the ball of black mass. He wanted to watch how it's able to corrode the cup. Maybe he might be able to understand it more if he could understand its destructive ability. Corrosion was the most notable ability of the darkness element. It could even be said to be its main ability. Gray felt if he understood this, then comprehending the darkness element would happen sooner than he expected. Having Void with him also made things better. As soon as the cup came in contact with the darkness ball, it started being shrouded by a black color. It started from the bottom of the cup to the top. This was even before the cup completely entered the black mass. After the darkness spread to the top of the cup, Gray quickly let go and used the wind element to support it mid-air, but the darkness soon started creeping into the wind he was using, and it was soon destroyed. The cup turned to ash from a touch from the darkness ball. It's like a venomous substance. All it needs is but a touch, Gray thought while observing the ash that was on the floor. He decided to try another experiment. Given how corrosive the darkness element was, he wanted to see if his powerful blue fire would be able to withstand it. With a wave of his hand, a blue fireball appeared and slowly started going closer to the ball of darkness. Void watched curiously as Gray's blue flame gradually got to his mass of darkness. When the fireball touched the black floating mass, a tug-of-war started. At first, the darkness started to corrode the fireball, but the fireball soon fought back. It grew brighter before pushing away the darkness around it. Both elements went to a standstill, with none giving the other an upper hand. After a while, Gray saw both balls had started to shrink, so he extinguished the flame. The flame is too strong. I'll use the earth element to see how it feels as the darkness element corrodes it, Gray thought. Why are you doing this? Void was forced to ask. He didn't understand why Gray was trying different experiments with the darkness element. He was even more confused when he saw Gray studying the scroll that was about the darkness element. I'm trying to understand how it works. If I can, then I'd be able to use the darkness element sooner than I thought, explained Gray. Wait, you have the darkness element? Asked a confused Void. Technically, not yet, said Gray. You can have it, but how's that possible? Void asked wide-eyed. Oh, you were still asleep when I told the others. Gray told Void about his ability to comprehend new elements, leaving the small cat lost for words. Void had never heard of anyone or anything that has been able to learn new elements. Well, he hadn't been in the world for a long time now. He knew from the others that one couldn't have an element they were not attuned with. Doesn't that mean you can learn the space element as well? Asked Void. Yup, every single element out there, Gray said with a grin. Damn, that's amazing, exclaimed Void. Yeah, it's just that comprehending each element isn't easy. Gray sighed before creating a knife with the earth element. Void became even more curious after finding out what Gray was trying to do. Gray continued with his experiments till it was evening. He went out to get some food for them, and was surprised to see that the city was still on lockdown. What did I do? He asked himself in annoyance. If he knew why they were looking for him, he would be less worried. But now, he had no idea why they were searching for him. All he knew was that it was not anything good, given how the mayor's making it look like he was a fugitive. When he got home, he ate with Void before sending him to infiltrate the mayor's house. He needed to know why they were looking for him, and the mayor was the only one he could find out from. Luckily, he had Void who could go into a place guarded by Overlord plane experts unnoticed. While Void was spying on the mayor to see if he could find out why they were searching for Gray, Gray was busy trying to comprehend the darkness element. For some reason, he felt he would be able to easily comprehend it. This feeling made him strive harder. He was slowly starting to understand the corrosiveness of the darkness element, and once he's able to, it would greatly boost his chances at comprehending the element. Void returned 2 days later with good news. The city was no longer on lockdown. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to find out why they were searching for Gray. The mayor never spoke of it when he was there, not even once. Gray felt burdened by his lack of not knowing why they were looking for him. I'll have to abduct one of those Origin plane instructors who are stationed around the forest. They should at least know why they are searching for me. Gray came up with a plan. Gray and Void could easily overpower any of the instructors that are still in the Origin plane. But just to be safe, he would find one who is still in the mid-stages of the Origin plane, like him. Ha ha! Yes! I love this plan, Void said excitedly. It was finally time to beat up someone. We're not beating anyone, Void. We only want to ask him some questions. Gray clarified. Chapter 283. Gray kept his disguise on as they left the city. The guards at the gate were more than when they came in, rigorously checking every individual that was entering or leaving the city. Void was already outside by the time Gray came out, but it was only after going almost 1 kilometer away from the city did he appear close to him. I'm pumped. Who do I have to beat? Void asked as soon as he appeared. I have no idea. We'll have to get there first, replied Gray. He was going to take the same path he took when he was leaving the forest. Once he gets in, he would send Void out to bring an instructor. Seeing how energetic Void was, he is already starting to pity the unlucky instructor he would choose. After they got to the forest, Gray realized the number of instructors increased. It's probably because they found out I left the valley. Gem PH. Such pests. He snorted coldly. He was chased almost throughout his time in the trial land. As soon as he left the place, he was attacked and Void was injured. Now it hadn't even been up to 2 weeks since leaving, yet he has to go into hiding. It was starting to get on his nerves. He sent Void ahead of him to scout the area like he did when he wanted to leave. After Void returned, he was able to navigate through the forest easily, without being found out. Without wasting any time, he quickly entered the valley. Before sending Void out to abduct an instructor, he made sure to warn him to handle it as quietly as possible, not to alert the others. 2 hours later, in Chris's valley, splash! A ball of water splashed on the face of a man who was tied to an earthen chair. He had claw marks on his face, although small. It was very distinct. His eyes were swollen, his hair was a mess, his clothes were torn on different parts. From how he looked, it was easy to discern that he must have been through a lot of hardship. When the ball of water was splashed on his face, he opened his eyes, but everything looked blurry. Seeing the unfamiliar scenery, he hastily looked around, but he still wasn't able to see properly. He tried standing, but failed. It was at that time that he noticed he was bound by ropes. He quickly tried to use his element, but his expression changed when he realized he couldn't. Do you think he can see us? Void asked when he saw the panicking instructor. They were standing right in front of the instructor, yet he hadn't even taken notice of them. Given how he looks, I'm surprised he's still alive. Gray sneered. I'm sorry, I got carried away. Void apologized. Gray looked at him speechless. When Void brought the man some minutes ago, he almost couldn't believe that the man was still alive. You call that being carried away? Look at him. Do you think he can see us properly? Gray pointed at the man who seems to be having difficulty seeing his surroundings, much less Gray and Void. Void looked at the man before shaking his head, even he didn't think the man would be able to see them. Hey, can you hear me? Gray snapped his finger in front of the man to draw his attention to him. The instructor looked ahead of him. Although he couldn't see properly, he was able to easily figure out where the sound was coming from. Who is that? How dare you kidnap me? The instructor yelled out arrogantly, stunning Gray in the process. Are we the ones tied to a chair, or is he? The dumbfounded Gray asked Void, who was on his shoulder. Void didn't have a reply and raised both shoulders as if saying, I don't know. Gray looked around just to be sure they were alone before sending another ball of water at the instructor. He felt the instructor wasn't awake yet. He's probably semi-conscious. Are you mad? Didn't hear me the first time. I'm an instructor of the Lunar Academy. If you know you aren't tired of living, you'll let me go now. The instructor continued yelling. F-U-C-K. Void, where did you get such a psychopath? Gray cursed out irritatedly. I didn't know he was like this. It's not like they write I'm a psychopath on their heads, replied a dejected Void. Fine, since he's like this because of your beating, fix him, Gray said before taking a seat on the wooden chair Chris had outside. Since the instructor was being stupid, he would leave him with Void. Given Void's character, it would be a miracle if he didn't kill him. Some minutes later, the valley was filled with the screams of the helpless instructor. At first, he was ordering them, but it soon got to the point when he started cursing at them. But a few minutes later, he started begging. Void continued beating him, and a few minutes later, other than the sobs of the instructor, Gray couldn't hear any other thing. It's enough. I think he's ready to talk, Gray said while standing up from Chris's chair. The crying instructor continued crying even after Void had stopped beating him. His previous swollen eyes had turned double their previous size. Now there is definitely no way he would be able to see. Hey, can you hear me? Gray repeated the same action as before, and unlike the last response, the instructor nodded. Good, I have some questions for you. I believe you can talk, right? Asked Gray. Why yes. A little slow, but it'll do, thought Gray. He made an earthen chair close to the instructor and started questioning him. He first asked when he became an instructor in the academy, and it was just as he suspected. The instructor was part of the new people assigned. After a little about his background, he asked the important question that had been bugging him. Why is the new principal searching for me? Chapter 284. Why is the new principal searching for me? Gray asked. I don't know. The instructor hesitated before replying. Looks like you're still not ready to speak. Void, fix him one more time, Gray said nonchalantly. He was not so kind-hearted or free to play games with the instructor. If the instructor had no plans of speaking, he'd just kill him and get Void to bring another one. Void was more than happy to give him more beatings. Unfortunately, the instructor had no plans of cooperating with him, because he quickly agreed to say what he knew. Sigh. Such a shame. Void shook his head after Gray told him to leave the instructor alone. What do you know? Gray asked as he came closer to the instructor. Water, please. The instructor begged as soon as he noticed Gray was coming close to him. Gray looked at the stream behind him, but still gave him the water he created with his water element. The instructor spat out the water as soon as it got into his mouth. There's a difference between normal water and water made by an elementalist. The water made by an elementalist had a sour and metallic taste. That didn't taste good for drinking, although in extreme times some elementalists have been known to drink it, but it rarely happens. Speak, Gray said, not caring about the instructor's reaction. He had already tagged most of the instructors as an enemy, and guessing that this one was one of the new ones, he had almost zero sympathies for him. But, the instructor wanted to speak of the running water he was hearing, but remembering how Void beat him up, he shut his mouth. I don't know about anything. I don't even know who you. He paused midway, thinking why someone he didn't know would kidnap him. Initially, he didn't know who he was speaking to, but hearing the mention of the word new principal, he was able to figure out who he was talking to. It's you. The instructor yelled in shock. Never in this world would he expect that the young man they were searching for would kidnap him. Instructor, my patience is very slim, Gray said slowly. This has nothing to do with me. I'm only following orders. The instructor begged. I guess you're not needed. Gray stood up from his seat, planning to let Void kill him. Wait, the instructor called out. All I know is that you have something the Emperor wants. The Emperor? So, you mean this has nothing to do with my teacher? Gray sat down, not too surprised about being the one they were looking for. What truly shocked him was that he had something the Emperor wanted. He didn't recall ever meeting the Emperor, nor did his teacher leave anything important with him that others would covet except for his teachings. That is, yes, the Emperor. He ordered that you should be captured alive. The instructor nodded continuously. And nothing, that's all I know. Are you sure? Yes, I swear on my life. I don't know anything else. Void. Wait, he also didn't want us to make this known to the public. And he only asked about you after the trial land closed. Anything else you want me to know? No, that's all I know. Gray looked at the instructor for a while. He couldn't say he fully believed him, but he felt worried about the involvement of the Emperor. The Emperor. How does a mere instructor know that the Emperor is the one who wants me? He asked himself. It's totally impractical for someone who is only in the origin plane to know about this. Void, bring in another instructor. Gray said. He wanted to confirm something. Yes, Void exclaimed happily. Alive, please. Wasn't this one alive? Just barely. Fine. Void went out again, and this time, it took him only 30 minutes to come back with an instructor. Fortunately, this one was able to see clearly. Gray asked him the same question he asked the previous one who was currently unconscious on another chair, and he got a different answer. This one apparently only knew that the new principal wanted him, and nothing else. Gray woke up the unconscious instructor, and after asking again, he found out the instructor eavesdropped on the higher-ups during one of their meetings. He currently had two possibilities in his head. First, the principal was only searching for him because of his teacher. Second, the principal was searching for him because the Emperor ordered it. And to be honest, he believed the first possibility more than the second one. What could he possibly bring out of the trial land that the Emperor would want? It was when he was thinking about this he recalled something. The Great Essence Liquid, thought Gray. That was the only thing he could think of that would make even an Emperor search for him, and from how the Emperor wanted to hide it from the public, it's like he wasn't the only one who knew about it. There's also the chance that he was overthinking, and maybe the Emperor wanted him for a different reason entirely. But whatever it was, he didn't want to find out, especially given how they were searching for him like a criminal. And what the instructors said, after what happened in the capital the last time, going there wasn't part of his agenda. Void, take care of them. Gray stood up and walked in the direction of his shack. Well, almost a shack. The shack had been destroyed from different explosions, and after using the earth element to make a shack multiple times, he gave up and just stayed in his roofless wooden shack. It wasn't so bad after he got used to it. Before he got in, he could already hear the screams of the instructors. But it quickly came to an end. There was no way he was going to let the instructors leave. Doing that would mean putting himself in danger. That wasn't something he would deliberately do. Chapter 285. Gray once again focused on completing the wooden object. Since the Emperor didn't want to make it known to the public that he was searching for him, then he wanted to quickly make the device and escape from this place. 2 weeks went by in this manner, and the search for Gray did not decrease, but rather it intensified. Not just that, but small skirmishes have been happening more frequently between the Killen and Azura empires, that everyone felt the war wasn't too far away from starting. In Chris's Valley. Ha ha! Finally, Gray's excited laughter rang out from his shack. Void was previously lying outside leisurely, but after hearing Gray's laughter, he hurriedly went in. What? Did you finally make it? He asked as soon as he went in. Ha ha! Of course. I knew I would be able to make it, Gray said excitedly before taking out a wooden item. Compared to the previously square-like ones, this one was circular, and almost 5 times the size of the previous ones. Although it was circular, it looked very crude. What is that? Void asked when he saw the crude-looking circular object. What do you know what? I'm not going to answer that, Gray said before tapping on the middle of the circular object with his index finger. Huh, why are there 5 sources instead of 4? Gray muttered under his breath. This must be me. Those belong to Clouse, Alice, and Reynolds. So who does the last one belong to? Gray first pointed at the light with the second highest number of lights, before pointing at the three, which had one light each. The three lights obviously represented his friends, and the reason he was able to guess his light was the one with the second highest number was because of the proximity of them. The source with the highest number was quite some distance away from them. If this is you, then who is this? Void asked curiously. It should belong to the people who originally created this thing. Since I linked mine with the other ones, it's also connected to theirs. Gray speculated. This was the only reason he could think of. Well, can't you just remodify your own so you don't see them? You know they might also be able to locate you with this, suggested Void. It's not entirely possible for them to be able to do that. You see, Gray explained how he made this wooden object. Unlike the previous ones which were all connected in some way, this one was different from the others. First, it didn't have a distance limitation. Secondly, the arrays he drew on this one made it almost impossible for any other wooden object to be able to locate it. Lastly, he only linked the others to it, and not the other way around. He used the identical array in the previous ones to create some sort of a connection with the one he made. He could locate them, but they couldn't locate him. You mean to say only you can find them, but they can't find you? Asked Void. Exactly, replied Gray. While he was making it, he thought of the possibility of this and realized, since these ones were made and given to Quinn in such high numbers, it meant the people who made them had more. But neither they nor the people have had any reactions from their respective wooden objects. This means that there's a limitation to the distance. If not, the people would have searched for him when he was crushing the wooden objects during his research. When are we leaving? Void asked. Since Gray was already done with what he wanted to do, then it was time to leave. Not yet. I'm already very close to comprehending the darkness element. It would be a shame if I leave without it, Gray said before keeping the device. During the past 2 weeks, Gray had not only focused on the device, but he also tried comprehending the darkness element. Had it not been for the near success he could feel from his comprehension, he would leave as soon as he completed his device. Void looked at him a little frustrated before going outside once again. I'm going hunting. He disappeared from the valley after saying this. This had been the only thing he had been doing for the past 2 weeks, while Gray was cooked up with his project. Other than hunting, he had also been venturing into the academy as well as the city in search of shiny things. Gray knew what he was up to, but knowing how hard it would be for anyone to catch him, he let him be. And Void had been very careful with the things he had been taking. Well, that's according to him. The real reason he let Void go into the city and the academy compound was so that he could bring the latest news to him. Initially, he only had the lightning, earth, wind, water, and fire elements present in his chaos space. But now, a small dark place had started forming. This represented the darkness element. When he first entered the chaos space, the initial 5 elements were present. He had always felt puzzled as to why he couldn't find any other element in it. Now he understood it. They would slowly appear as he comes in contact with them. He had always been in contact with the 4 elements, which were fire, water, wind, and earth. The reason why lightning was added to the fray was that it was his original element. So that's it. Huh, thought Gray. Once he starts comprehending a new element that was not in the chaos space, it would appear in the chaos space, making comprehension easier. This gave him more hope in being able to comprehend the space element soon. Chapter 286. Gray stood in the chaos space and looked at the budding darkness in it. He still didn't understand how this place truly worked, other than when he came here to comprehend the elements, or to check his elemental grades. He knew nothing else about it. The appearance of the darkness element gave him a little understanding, but it's not really much. Compared to the darkness element, he had been in more contact with the space element, yet he hadn't seen anything concerning it in the chaos space. Phew, here goes nothing. Gray sighed before walking into the darkness. When he stepped into the darkness, he could sense a ravaging destructive energy that wanted to destroy everything in its path. Other than that, there was really nothing else. He looked around, but he couldn't get a glimpse of light. The only source of light was from the place he used in entering the darkness. He walked about 100 meters into the darkness, but as soon as he took another step past the 100 meters mark, he suddenly felt a sense of danger and quickly retreated. The energy there is at least 5 times greater than it is here. I can't go any further, or I might hurt myself. Guess this is the first limit for this element, huh? He thought. Each element in the chaos space has a separate space. There's always a limit when he first enters. After his elemental grade for that element increases, the distance he could go in without hurting himself increases. There's a different distance in each element, like for his wind element. Before comprehending it, he could go as deep as 300 meters, but for his fire, it was only 200 meters. The darkness element has been the shortest so far. With that, Gray sat cross-legged in the darkness and closed his eyes. There's no better way to understand something than to personally feel it. The destructive and corrosive energy of the darkness element started ravaging his spiritual body, giving him a better understanding of it. This was his first time entering the darkness space in the chaos space, and it was a strange feeling. He had experienced the feeling of the fire, water, lightning, wind, and earth element, but this was the time he was experiencing the darkness element on his body. Well, spiritual body. 20 minutes later. Crap. So soon. Gray opened his eyes before standing up and dashing straight for the only source of light in the darkness space. Parts of his spiritual body was starting to slowly become black. He managed to come out from the darkness space within a few seconds. But his left hand was almost completely black, and even though he was currently in a spiritual state, it was very painful. The darkness which was previously moving upwards had stopped in its track. Gray stared at his left hand in fear. This was only the second time he had been hurt in the chaos space. The first time he was hurt was when he entered the lightning space for the first time, and it was because he didn't understand the rules of the place at that time. Even though he knew that the time he could spend in the darkness space was short due to the short distance he could travel, he expected it to at least get to an hour, not 20 minutes. The color of his hand slowly started reverting to its normal color after 30 minutes of pain. Shit. I hate this element, Gray complained, but as soon as the pain stopped, he ran back into the darkness space. He couldn't stop himself. How could he give up on the darkness element just because of a few minutes of pain? This time, he sensibly timed himself. He stayed in the darkness space for only about 15 minutes. After the 15 minutes time, he would go out of the darkness space. He repeated the same routine another 3 times before he noticed he couldn't go in anymore. Well, that's it for today. By the time he came out of the chaos space, it was already late. But Void was not in the shack. He didn't sense Void in the valley as well, but he knew he wasn't far away. Where are you? He asked Void through their mind link. On my way, replied Void. Gray sat down close to the stream and placed his legs inside it, enjoying the coolness of it. Bam! A dog-like beast with antlers was dumped on the ground before Void appeared above it. Brought dinner. I'm out of ingredients, Gray replied with a shrug. I know, that's why I got you some, Void said before making some small containers to appear close to Gray. Gray picked up one of the containers, opened the lid, and sniffed it. This isn't used for cooking, it's what ladies use for makeup. Gray burst out laughing when he realized what Void brought back, thinking it was ingredients used for cooking. Although there were 2 among the 5 items he brought which were ingredients, he couldn't use them on this meat. He decided to roast the meat without any ingredients. It wasn't like it wouldn't taste good without the ingredients anyway. The next day, Gray gave Void a detailed description of the ingredients he wanted before going into the chaos space. 3 weeks passed in this manner. Gray stayed in the darkness space most of the time, with Void having free reign to go out as much as he pleased. Now, Gray could stay in the darkness space for almost 1 hour, without getting hurt by the darkness element. Just a little more, and I'll finally be able to leave this place, Gray thought. The only good news he got so far was that he could freely come out of the forest now, since the instructors weren't searching for him in the forest anymore. During the next week, he would occasionally head to the city, with his disguise on of course, and a large cloak. 1 week later, Gray was currently sitting in a crossed-leg position in the darkness space. He looked like a statue that was completely covered by a black cocoon. A crack ran across the cocoon. After the first crack, more lines started spreading across the cocoon. Boom! The cocoon exploded out, spreading in all directions. And Gray, who was seated, opened his eyes, but his eyes were pitch black. Chapter 287. Grays looked around, and the darkness seemed perfectly lit. He was currently seated close to the 100 meters mark. With a casual step, he walked past it into the other side. Even after awakening my darkness element, it's still difficult to freely enter this place, he thought before walking back. Just as he was about to walk out of the darkness space, he sensed a strange occurrence in his body that was outside the chaos space. He wore a confused face, a little taken aback by what he was sensing. It was only after a few seconds he realized what was happening. He was starting to form the elemental bead for his darkness element. His previous 5 elements were attained before he broke through to the origin plane, so he forgot about this. Without wasting any time, he sat down cross-legged while still in the darkness space, and focused on forming his elemental bead. What better place to form an elemental bead than the place where the element is abundant? He was currently in a spiritual state, but he could perfectly form it in his body that was outside the chaos space. He was already very familiar with the technique. After already creating 5, with a calm mind, he used his spiritual energy to form a sphere around the darkness element, which was still in a chaotic state. After forming the sphere, he slowly started compressing it. He made sure to compress it to its limit while also making sure not to overdo it. It took him about 10 minutes to completely form it. As soon as he finished it, he sensed the increase in his strength. Unfortunately, he was unable to get to the 6th stage of the origin plane. He expected this since it hadn't been long he broke through to the 5th stage, and after he broke through to the 5th stage, he had not made any attempts to even cultivate. Not just that, but he knew with every increase in strength, the harder it would be for him to break through. When he was done with forming the elemental bead, he stood up and left the darkness space, heading in the direction of the mountain peak in the chaos space. Although he could already guess the elemental grade of his new element, he still wanted to see it for himself. Who knows, maybe it might go higher than the pink grade. After walking to the stone, he placed his hand on it, and after the usual routine, the stone lit up with 6 different colors. The fire element took up most of the stone, while the lightning and wind elements, which were blue grades, each covered the same area. The earth and water element were purple each, while the darkness element was pink. None of my elements have seen any increment for a while now. I guess I've been too focused on getting a new one, Gray thought before leaving the chaos space. His previously motionless body twitched before he opened his eyes. A dark aura spread out from where he was seated, and its corrosiveness slightly affected the things around him. The wooden shack slowly started decaying, while the grass around the house also showed signs of decaying. Luckily, nothing important was close to him. By important, he meant his teacher's chair, which was some meters away from his shack. Void, who was outside, sensed the aura and quickly stood up. He could already guess that Gray had awakened the darkness element. This excited him because they would be leaving this boring place soon. "Hey, you've done it?" he still asked even after knowing the answer. Gray nodded before opening his hand, and the black mass appeared above it. It gave off a deadly eerie aura which gave Void a fright. He smiled before sending it in Void's direction. Void quickly escaped with the space element HMPH. "Even though you have this now, I still have the space element, which gives me the edge. I'll get it soon. That's when you really need to worry." Gray smirked when he saw how easily Void escaped his attack. "When will we be leaving?" Void asked the question that was important to him. "In a week's time or so. I still need to prepare the devices for the others. I'm already done with 2, all I need is 1 more," said Gray. During the time he was trying to comprehend the darkness element, whenever he couldn't enter the darkness space, he would focus on making the devices. He hadn't been able to figure out how to add a communication array, so he left that out for now. The devices he was making for the others weren't like his own. They would only be able to sense each other, but not the 4th group, the people who originally made the wooden object. He was scared that maybe if it was linked to it, they might curiously head there, or maybe those people might be able to sense them. Void nodded without asking any more questions. This was the reason they stayed here for so long anyway, so it would be a waste if they didn't prepare the other devices for the other 3. Gray wasn't too bothered with the device, since he already knew how to make it. It was no longer an issue. What really bothered him was another issue. "I still have 4 with me. One of them belongs to Clouse's dad, which leaves me with only 3. If I use 1 now, I'll be left with 2, he thought. He was currently contemplating if he should use the Great Earth Essence to improve the elemental grade of his darkness element. But it didn't take him long to come to a decision. He originally thought of giving one to each of his parents, then one to his teacher, and then Klaus's father. But it looks like his dad won't be getting any, since he was about to use it. After coming to a decision, he immediately brought out one of the drops of the Great Essence liquid and started refining it. Chapter 288. The last time he absorbed the Great Earth Essence liquid, it took him around 6 hours or so. This time, he did it within 4 hours. His absorption speed when it came to cultivating had increased significantly with the increase in his strength as well as elements. At this rate, if I were to enter the trial land again and focus fully on cultivating, I shouldn't have a problem with getting to the Overlord plane within 6 months. Gray thought while rubbing his chin. Sigh, unfortunately, that's impossible. He entered the chaos space to see what grade his darkness element got to. He expected it to be around the purple grade at least, and he wasn't disappointed. Now of his 6 elements, the fire element was cyan, the lightning and wind elements were blue, the earth, water, and darkness elements were purple. The only disappointing thing about the increase in his darkness elemental grade was that he still didn't break through to the 6th stage of the origin plane, but he could sense he wasn't far from it. 3 days later, Gray walked out of the decayed-looking shack while stretching his body. It was finally time for them to leave this place, and he couldn't be happier. He brought out 3 disc-like wooden objects, and lightly tapped on the middle of each of them. A hologram appeared above them, and 4 lights could be seen, all very close to each other. It was just as Gray planned. They were all only linked to each other, so they couldn't track the ones he got from Quinn. Only his own could do that. He kept them in his storage ring, before taking out his crude-looking own. After tapping on the middle, a hologram appeared. This should be either Alice or Reynolds. Clouse is most likely the one who is farther away. Gray muttered as he looked at the hologram. 2 were not that far from his location, and 2 were quite far. It wasn't hard to differentiate between which one belonged to Clouse and the people who made it. One had a single light source, and the other had multiple light sources around the same area. The one Gray felt belonged to Clouse had moved a significant distance compared to the last time he saw it, and since Clouse was the only one he knew who was on the move amongst the 3, he felt his guess was right. "Where are you?" Gray asked Void through their mind links. "Academy." "Why?" asked Void. "Did you take the books I told you about?" Gray asked. "Yes, I took them. I took them all," Void said in a dramatic manner, making Gray chuckle lightly. Before he went back into his seclusion-like training, he gave Void a task. He told Void to go to the Academy's library and get him books that he could find that touched on forgery. He didn't tell him an exact number, so hearing that he took all of them amused him. "Well, it's not like I have any goodwill towards the current Academy anyway, but taking all the books on forgery seems a little too overboard," Gray said. "So should I return some?" asked Void. "No, there's no need. Come, let's get going before they notice the books are gone," Gray said with a grin. He would return them after he was done studying them. He wasn't stealing them anyway, just borrowing. "Great. We're finally leaving," Void exclaimed excitedly before hurrying back to the forest. Although the Academy had stopped searching for him in the valley, Gray wouldn't carelessly come out without Void first telling him if the area was safe. Void soon got to the valley, and after going around the place, he gave Gray the go-ahead to leave the place. Gray wore a long black hooded robe that covered parts of his face, while also putting a disguise on. He didn't want to make any mistakes. Getting caught wasn't something he wanted to happen. "So where are we headed?" asked Void. "Well, I don't really know the exact location. All I know is that it's in that direction." Gray pointed in the direction of the south while staring at the wooden object in his hands. He didn't know which of his friends was there, but he didn't really bother about it, since he would find out when he got there. Gray and Void towards their destination. They didn't know where they were going, so Gray planned to get a map once they got to the next city. That way he would be able to at least guess their destination. That would also give him a rough idea of who he was going to see. 1 month ago, 2 days after the trial land closed, in Quinn's family compound, in his father's office, a man could currently be seen kneeling with his head bowed, afraid to look at the enraged eyes of Quinn's father. You're saying none of them made it out alive? Quinn's father asked with an infuriated and sad look. Yes, my lord, the arrays had already disappeared, but there were no signs of them. The man kneeling replied with his head still bowed in fear. Boom. The table in the office was smashed into smithereens by Quinn's enraged father. His son, whom he had high hopes for, was dead. Of course, he would be annoyed. My lord, the kneeling man called out, trying to calm Quinn's father. What? Roared Quinn's father. According to reports, they seem to have found the treasure. The kneeling man said. What? Where is it? Quinn's father asked agitatedly. If Quinn was able to find it before his death, that means that his death was worth it. The only thing now is that he was not able to personally bring it home. The treasure is actually the Great Earth Essence liquid. I believe my lord has heard of it. The man said, only managing to raise his head now. The Great Earth Essence liquid. Where is it? Quinn's father asked, stuttering. They found it, but couldn't take it. Rather, it was stolen by a group. Chapter 289. They found it, but couldn't take it. Rather, it was stolen by a group. The man said in a serious tone. Quinn's father looked at the man, indicating for him to continue speaking. When the young lord and his group found the Great Earth Essence liquid, it was being protected by elemental warriors. The man told Quinn's father what happened in the trial land. It was almost like he was present there when everything unfolded. He told Quinn's father about how Quinn's group fought against Gray's group, before he was later killed by Gray. How do you know all this? Quinn's father couldn't help but ask. The man's story was so detailed that it looked like he was there at the time it was happening. He had a hard time not believing it. While I was waiting for the young lord to come out, a youth from the Stellar Empire came out. I happened to overhear him when he was speaking to the leader in his empire's camp. Not just me, even the other empires are aware of this fact. The man said. Where's the boy who took it now? Asked Quinn's father. The Killen Empire. I've sent people to retrieve him, but none of them have been successful. The man said with a serious expression, before adding, neither has any of them returned. What? You mean that they've all been killed? Quinn's father was left dumbfounded by this discovery. I'm not sure, but it seems to be the case. The man answered with uncertainty. After finding out about Gray, he did a little research about him and found out he was from a small city. This was why he sent people to search for him. Who would have thought that they would all be killed? We must retrieve the treasure at all cost. Send word to the Crown Prince. He would know what to do. Quinn's father said. Yes, my lord. The man bowed before leaving the office. Quinn's father stood up from his seat, and a tear unconsciously dropped down his face. It's a sacrifice worth paying for the future of the family. He walked towards the bookshelf in the office. After pushing a book, a secret passage opened behind it. He wanted to report this to the elders of the family, as well as his father. The loss of Quinn was a great loss, given how talented he was. But the appearance of the treasure outweighed it, since it involved years of planning. The next day, Killen Empire, the royal palace. The emperor and the crown prince were currently walking in a garden in the palace discussing. You mean to say that a young man from my empire brought out such a treasure? The emperor asked in surprise. Yes, father. I believe you'll hear of this soon from those stationed at the exit, replied the crown prince. How did you find out so early? The emperor couldn't help but ask. I'm the crown prince. It's only normal for me to have my own people who bring me information at the fastest speed. The crown prince answered in a cool and collected manner. That's understandable. So who's the boy? Summon him to the palace this instant. The emperor ordered. That's where the problem lies. He's a student in the Lunar Academy. The crown prince said. Since when has the Lunar Academy been a problem? Have you forgotten I'll be taking over in a few days' time? The emperor asked. The fact that he's a student of the Lunar Academy isn't the problem. The problem is that his personal teacher is Chris. You should know who I'm talking about. You mean that? Yes, it's him. The young man was the reason Chris killed an instructor from the Starlight Academy during the time of the competition. What do you suggest we do then? The other empires have gotten wind of this as well, so we need to act quickly. It's still unknown if Chris is in the academy or not. Oliver and Blake have been very cautious when talking about him, but I have a plan, and given Chris's personality, he would appear if it works. Okay, good. Do you know if your brother made it? He's dead. The last batch of people who left the trial land still hadn't gotten to their destinations, but Neil had already returned, and the Crown Prince questioned him. When he found out about the 12th Prince's stupidity, he gave up on him making it out alive. Who in their right minds would go and attack a dragon? Okay, act according to your plan. I'll wait for your good news. If we can't have it, then no one should, especially someone related to that unruly bastard. What if he has already used them? Then kill him and his friends. What about them? It is said he took 9 drops of the Great Earth Essence liquid. I think he might share it with them. Get the boy first, kill the others later. Okay, father. A few days later, the Crown Prince heard of Oliver officially stepping down from his position as the principal and mayor of Lunar Academy and City respectively. He sent people to spread the rumor of them being scared of joining the war and tagging them cowards. Oliver would not be bothered with the rumor. Chris, on the other hand, would not only bother about it, but he would also want to kill people. After a day of peace, the Crown Prince speculated that their guess for the past months has been true. Chris was not in the academy. This meant they could technically do whatever they wanted with the academy. Unfortunately, Oliver had stepped down, as well as the major powers in the academy. This gave the Emperor a headache, but the Crown Prince wasn't too concerned about it. Now with Chris and even Oliver out of the picture, he could take care of Gray without any problems. The only issue now was how he could get Clouse, since he would be with his father. Chapter 290. The moment Oliver, Blake, and Clouse left the academy, the Crown Prince gave the order for Gray to be found. The instructors started to search for him, but after he hid in Chris's valley, it was impossible to locate him. They wasted weeks searching for Gray, but they didn't get any result. The Crown Prince wasn't sure if Gray gave his friends a drop of the Great Earth Essence liquid, but he couldn't let it go without investigating. With Gray and Clouse currently impossible to find, he set his eyes on the other two, Alice and Reynolds. Alice was the daughter of a prestigious and powerful family. It wouldn't be easy to get her. Reynolds, on the other hand, was a piece of cake. 1 week before Gray left Chris's valley, Eternal City, Reynolds could be seen walking leisurely in the busy city with his hands behind his head. A young boy could be seen walking behind him. They had a striking resemblance, with the younger one having blue hair, while Reynolds had brown short hair. "Big bro, where are we going?" Carl asked, tugging on Reynolds' shirt. "Huh?" Reynolds stopped and looked at Carl before smiling. "I have no idea. I just wanted to take a stroll." "Oh," Carl replied before looking at the ground with a sad face. "What? You want to do something else?" Reynolds asked while squatting to the height of Carl. Carl fidgeted while looking at his fingers, which he was rotating around each other. "Come on, tell big bro. You know I will do whatever you want," Reynolds said while ruffling Carl's hair. "Really?" Carl asked with shining eyes. "Well, not everything, but I'll try my best," Reynolds said, scratching his head awkwardly. He had to tell Carl he couldn't do everything. It would be awkward if he asked him to do something he couldn't do. "Okay, I want to watch Big Bro train," Carl said with sparkling eyes. "Just that." Carl nodded enthusiastically, waiting for Reynolds' reply with a little hint of nervousness. "I can't practice in the city," Reynolds said with his hand on his chin, which caused a look of disappointment to appear on the face of Carl. He smiled before continuing, "But I'm totally free to practice outside the city." A smile crept into Carl's face when he heard this. "Come, little man, let Big Bro show you how powerful he is," Reynolds said proudly before lifting Carl up and placing him on his shoulder. Reynolds was genuinely happy. This was the longest he had stayed with his family since joining the academy. His younger brother was only 2 years old when he joined the academy, and now he was already very close to 8 years old. His parents were beside themselves when they learned he would be staying for an extended period this time. Reynolds took Carl out of the city and headed for the open field that was not too far from the city. It was a hidden place where he could perform most of his moves freely without fear of destroying anything. He placed Carl on a boulder before saying, "Sit here and watch how awesome your big bro is." Carl nodded excitedly, waiting for Reynolds to begin his performance. It was almost like he was waiting for a performer in a show. Reynolds turned around and breathed out heavily. A serious expression appeared on his face, and just as he was about to make lightning appear, he paused and looked at the south. He could sense some people coming in his direction, and the strongest amongst them was in the 5th stage of the origin plane. People in the origin plane, he thought to himself, a little taken aback. Eternal City was not a big city. If the cities in the empires were ranked, It would be a mid-ranked city at most. The mayor was an Origin Plane expert, and the number of Origin Plane elementalists in the city could be counted on just one hand. He quickly turned to Carl. "Hey little man, we might have to go home sooner than expected." Carl wanted to refute, but on seeing Reynolds' serious expression, he shut his mouth. He knew since Reynolds brought him here, it meant that he wanted to show him what he asked for. Reynolds smiled before grabbing hold of Carl and heading towards the city. He didn't know what those people wanted, and even if they wanted to cause trouble, he wasn't scared. But with Carl here, he didn't want any accidents to occur. He suddenly noticed that as soon as they started walking to the city, one of the people from the group hurried towards him. He didn't lose his cool. Walking at the same pace, he held onto Carl's arm tightly. If things were to go wrong, he would prioritize the safety of his younger brother above everything else. It didn't take the person who was running after him 2 minutes before he caught up. "Hello, you must be Reynolds," the young man called out from behind them. The young man was putting on a blue fitted shirt and trousers, with a golden eagle-like insignia imprinted on the chest of the shirt. The young man looked to be around his mid-20s, but had already reached the third stage of the Origin Plane. From how he was able to quickly catch up, and the wind element rotating around him, it wasn't hard for Reynolds to guess that he was a wind elementalist. Reynolds stopped and turned to look at the young man coolly. There wasn't a change in his expression. If Clouse saw him in this current state, he would definitely curse at him for trying to act like a cool guy. After studying the young man carefully, he asked calmly, "Yes, how may I help you?" "We're from the Empire's forces. You were recommended by an expert who met you some time ago. The Crown Prince sent us here to come to ask if you would like to join us, since you haven't given a reply yet." The young man explained the purpose of his coming to Reynolds. "Oh, the Crown Prince," Reynolds said with a surprised and excited look appearing on his face. The young man nodded with a smile, waiting for Reynolds to continue. This is the end of this video. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed and wish you wonderful rest of the day. The silent Ruptor's out.